I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Alrighty. Item C, approval of agenda. Were there any changes to the agenda other than this?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, there is one new item under new business, letter I, which is the approval of a server upgrade for city offices. If you downloaded your agenda like yesterday, you would see this on your packet already.
Okay. There are no other changes. We'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from the council? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Item D, approval of minutes. The minutes of the April 16, 2019 meeting were included with your packet. Are there any changes to those? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Second. A motion and a second. Any further discussion from the council? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Item E, citizens input. Is anyone here to talk about anything that is not on the agenda?
What was that?
Citizens input. Jim, do you have something to share?
Yes.
Step on up. Tell us your name. Most of us know who you are, but you know what I mean.
This is where I stand?
Yeah, please.
James Wackler, 1308 7th Avenue. I'm wondering what's going on with the Hanson property.
Oh, good question.
I've lived alongside of that mess for 40 years, and it's burnt down. It should be cleaned up pretty sudden. I was out in the garden this morning for 2 hours, and it's a mess.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Do you want to speak to that? Thank you.
Yeah, I can. Sure.
I had Mr. Hagen Miller up there with Judy here a couple weeks ago. I thought maybe something would happen, but
Yeah.
still the same old mess.
Well, the wheels of government, you know,
Very true. Yeah,
I know
Mr.
none of you guys would live beside it for 40 years.
probably right.
No, there's no disputing the issue. So as a refresher to council and to you, Mr. Wackler, last fall, the council did pass an abatement order that ultimately would allow us to file a petition at district court to essentially abate that nuisance. And with that included the cars and the debris. Not long after the house fire occurred, which, believe it or not, we've actually had this issue a couple other times where we've had active orders and there's been issues with the property where we kind of step back as to not add insult to injury. But to Jim's point, just 2 weeks ago, I believe, I met on site with Judy to pick up the topic again. I'm currently working with Wright County Community Action Council and some other organizations to find a way to clean up that property. It's relatively complicated because she has an existing mortgage that also needs to be cleared out with the fire money, which also plays into who and how pays for the cleanup. Ultimately, the city has the legal right to enter the property and do that cleanup, but anything that she can do as the property owner takes that cost burden off the city. So I'm trying to be as agreeable as possible to shift that cost burden from the city to her. And she understands that. Right now, we do not have an actual date for cleanup, but it's likely going to involve a wrecking crew to clean up the cars and metal. It's also going to involve a garbage company and also just like a sea of volunteers, all coordinated roughly at the same time.
So if the city incurred a cost for that, would you just assess it back to the property?
Correct. Yeah, it's bad. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
So I don't know if that's exactly what you want to hear, Jim.
No. Why don't you get the county in here? That all belongs to the county anyhow, more than likely.
Well, I don't.
Because when they
I
had
don't
to
think-
get the new furnace, the county put it in. When they put in new windows, the county put it in.
Well, but they don't own the property. I mean, I get your point, but there isn't anything the county can do, really. That,
I can speak to it a little
I'd like
bit.
to see some
So
action in the next week or two.
well, I don't think it's gonna happen that fast unless she does something. Unless the
yeah,
property owner does
and I don't foresee that. So we are working with Wright County Community Action Council, which is kind of an armor.
Don't we put up fences around junkyards?
Sure. Yeah. So yes. But yeah, so I'm working with the county agency to help with the cleanup. In terms of, does it belong to the county? No. The only way that the county would end up with that property is 5 years from now if nothing happens, including the non-payment of taxes. So we did look into that. That stuff is current. There's not even a risk of reverting back to the county.
And then the other item I had was, people have been contacting me, and for what reason, I don't know, but our fishing piers aren't in. The one at Memorial Park and the one out on Lions Park. And when we have baseball games, a lot of people bring their kids and send them down to the park for fishing.
Yeah.
And then neither one of them are in. I was down there last night and I thought, well, at this time of the year, we catch a lot of fish there.
Right.
And then it isn't in the water.
Yeah. Why is it not in?
Sure. Both of our fishing piers are being stained right now, so we haven't pushed them out because you don't want to be spraying stain over the water. So both of them are being stained. They should be done by the end of this week.
Are we staying in?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
So that's a little bit of a better answer than the first
Yeah.
question. Still not exactly what you
Well,
wanted
it
to
should be
hear.
put in because
Yeah.
they're, instead of sitting there twiddling your thumbs,
Right.
they should be put in so they can fish.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yep.
Well, it sounds like we're at the end of the week, so.
Mm-hmm.
And you got all the big equipment here, it shouldn't take that long to
Yeah.
do that.
But I think they're just probably waiting for the stain to dry now.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I got.
That's all you
All right,
got.
Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Anybody else?
Steve, you are on the agenda after. Yeah.
You're looking at this direction.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Sean Derringer. Just over 5 months in office now. I just wanted to stop back down and check in. You were all very gracious last year as I was on the campaign trail. You allowed me a few minutes to come and introduce myself and talk to you, answer a couple of questions that night. So I just wanted to return and say I am here. If you need anything, I'm certainly available. Have a great relationship with your chief and the police department here. We work hand in hand together. So as any election and as politics go, it seems like sometimes there's a lack of grace, and you chalk it up to just politics being politics. But I know that there was maybe some misinformation last year, and I don't know if any of those questions have been answered to date. But certainly, if you had any questions or concerns, I'm here to answer any questions you might have. But other than that, I'm simply here to check in and say hello, and I look forward to continuing our relationship with the police department. I think we work efficiently and effectively. I'm actually going to stick around for a couple of minutes. The chief is going to talk about the new Zerker system. We've been on Zerker since May of 2015. Love the interface. And I think that this is going to allow us to share information a lot more effectively. I think there will be some efficiencies. For somebody like the Howard Lake Police Department to have our additional 3 million name cards that we have in the system, it's better and easier to find people when we need to find people. Actually, I've got county board action coming up at the end of the month. I'm entering into a joint powers agreement, or I'm signing an addendum to a current joint powers agreement with the Sherburne County Sheriff's Office. There's 9 other agencies that share in that joint powers agreement to a fusion center actually in Sherburne County. So I believe that, the people that we chase around don't abide by county boundaries. So it seems like the Sherburne County Sheriff's Office to Stearns County to the metro agencies are usually chasing the same people. And this is going to allow us to collaborate a lot more effectively. I actually plan on sending one of our detectives out at least weekly to work right inside the Fusion Center, which is tapped into the Fusion Center in Hennepin County. And so I believe that it's going to allow us to even share more information than what we currently are able to share, and be able to get some results. So looking forward to that. Just a quick update. So.
Thanks for
Thank you.
coming. Congratulations
Yes.
on the election.
I appreciate it. Thank you very
So-
much. Most days I still feel like I'm trying to drink water out of a fire hose, but it's going very well.
I'm sure that'll change by the next election.
It's a busy job. It's a very busy job. So thanks for having me. I appreciate a few minutes of your time.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Assuming that's it. So we'll move along. Council committee reports. Parks and Planning Commission. Who's giving an update? Gene, Jason, both of you?
Yes, we met, Parks and Planning met last week to discuss what we're calling Central Park here in Howard Lake, the former middle school grounds. It's moving along. We were presented with some phase costing and some ideas, and what was maybe not Gene might not agree with this, but what I struggled with is that I want things to happen overnight and want things to happen right away. And when you look at something that might cost $1.7 million and you have $270,000 set aside for new parks creation, I can see that creative financing is really needed, and I don't think it's going to be creative enough because we have other items in this in our community that really require our immediate attention, and I think we're dealing with it right now. So the phasing becomes more attractive, the idea of having things happen over time for me. But I also, aside from the meeting, I did reach out to a company for my own benefit to see what, there was a lot of people talking about restrooms, needing public restrooms there inside from Minibus. And the numbers are right on. When somebody throws out a number and says a bathroom can be $250,000, it can be. I mean, the guy that I contacted, or the company that I contacted, threw out numbers. He has restrooms in the $90,000 to $250,000 range for a facility like this. So it was pretty quick. That's
Spent all your budget. I'm done.
exactly. So while I agree it's important, it's needed. It's a beautiful space. It'll be a great addition. It just won't happen as fast as maybe as what I wanted to. But what do you think?
I mean, I think everybody wants to
Right.
fast, so you're not alone.
What do you think, Gene?
Well, I think we did stress how important it was, though, to keep it on the top shelf. I mean, not the top shelf. I sometimes think that's the one you can't reach. But, we have to continue to work on it. Sometimes you let things kind of, you don't do, it isn't something that you dwell on a lot or keep bringing up or whatever. We need to keep pushing forward to get that done. So as quickly as possible would be nice. I just wanted to report that I went to the watershed meeting, which was really interesting. They said there was a person there from the Soil and Water Our District, and talked a little bit about the rain gardens. They're not a popular thing, which he did say, but he did stress that those native plants, and when those roots go down so far in the ground, and that's what prevents that erosion. And I was thinking, why do they pick this plant or that plant? And then he also said the clarity of the lake is better than it's been in a number of years, and the phosphorus level is down. I mean, it's not exactly where we want it, but it's getting better. So it was a good meeting. I was glad I went.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Anything else? Any other council committee reports? Nope. What's that?
You wouldn't look me and I give you a budget report.
Well, you can. Oh, yeah, we haven't had one. Oh, do we have one?
We're not involved with
Okay, well, then you don't have a bus report. All right, let's see. Item G, department reports. There is no liquor store financials available right now, so we'll hit those next month, I'm assuming. So, HLPD annual update. Dave's making a grand entrance.
I turn back. Mr. Mayor, Council, guests, Sheriff Derringer, this is the HLPD 2018 annual report. We're almost halfway through 19, but this is our annual report for 18. Next, please. A lot of times folks ask me, hey, who are the police officers and how are they? We hardly get to see them. Most of the part-timers work at night. So this is a picture from last year, Good Neighbor Days. We have Reserves Christensen and Chiro on the far left, and then Officer Shabanik, the school resource officer, Crystal Fair, Ashley Holtz, who now works for Sean at Wright County.
Thank you, she's awesome.
Myself, Megan McDonald, who also works at Ramsey County Sheriff full-time, Ken Rollins, Eric, Sergeant Anderson, and then Brandon Cockey, the sergeant of our reserves, and Jordan Goodman is no longer our CSO, and I'll talk about that a little later. Not pictured here are Ken Coots, our newest officer, and then Buberhoos and Bonnick, who both work for the Sheriff's Office full-time and work for us part-time, and then Kyle Thompson, who used to work for the Sheriff's Office. Now he's a full-time realtor, and he works part-time for us. The agenda, this is what I'm going to talk about tonight. Go on. Personnel, no real changes in our structure from the last time I briefed last year. Obviously, the chief, we have started Anderson, who's been here since 2007. He does evidence, firearms. He does all our background investigations. We have Derek, who works down at the school, school resource officer, really valuable asset down there. He had the canines out there from the sheriff's office today, working with the school. He also does our taser instruction and our use of force instruction. He is also our primary FTO, so when we get a new officer, Derek's the one who does most of the training with the new officers. School resource officer, community service officer, resigned during the last year. We just posted the job. We have a very qualified, very interested person who's just dropped an application. So we will get to meet him later this week. And then we also have a couple of openings in the reserves, and we have a couple people who are interested in that as well. Coots was the only new hire in 2018, and Ashley was the only one who left. We have one open badge, and we are not looking at hiring an additional part-time officer at this time. Questions on that? Here's the personnel breakdown by name. Basically, repeat of what I just said. We have one open badge number and 2 open reserve badges, and then the CSO is open as well. And we most likely will fill the CSO and one of those reserve officers here soon. Got a picture of Coots swearing in. I think y'all remember that. Good day for us. He's been a really, really good asset. He got a job full-time doing security at St. Thomas University. So he wants to stay here part-time. Usually our guys come on, and within a year they're just gone, but he got a really good job at St. Thomas, and he wants to stick around here for a while as a part-time officer. So he's been a real good asset. Incidents. We stayed generally between 1,600 and 2,000 incidents per year. We did have the one spike in 2016, which was the Officer Schmidt factor, almost all tickets that he wrote. We had a little spike again this year from last year, and almost all that is citations as well. We wrote a few more citations this year than we did last year. And then with the Zerker interface with Letchi, it was getting worse and worse, and we were getting a lot of error incidents, and once they hit, you can't delete them. So we had a lot of error incidents in 2018. Now that should be fixed now that we're on Zerker with the Sheriff's Office. I think we're going to have a kind of large drop in incidents next year because verbal warnings are not incidents in Zerker. They were all incidents in Letchi. But if you just give someone a verbal warning in Zerker, it counts it as what's called a call for service, and it doesn't call it an incident. So we'll have a little drop in incident numbers, but I really don't think we should have been calling verbal warnings an incident anyway. It's just how our system worked. Statistics. When you look at specific incidents, we had a few differences. We had a spike in domestics in 2017. You see it went from 34 to 47. It went back down to 27 in 2018. It spiked early in 17, and we just kept getting domestic calls. A few of those people have moved out from a couple of the apartment buildings where we were having a lot of issues. They've moved out, and that decreases our number dramatically to get 3 or 4 residents out who we have a lot of domestic calls at, and that attributes to a lot of that difference between 17 and 18. There is an uptick in thefts, but 16 of those were gas drive-offs. We've been having a lot of gas drive-offs at pit stop, and they're not actually criminal. They go in and they have some food, they pumped outside, they pick up some food, they go up to the counter, and they forget to charge them for their gas. And so then we get a hold of them, they go pay for their gas. So almost none of the gas drive-offs are actually thefts. Burglaries spiked a little bit. No real reason for that I can say. We have real low numbers, so there can be fluctuations with just a few incidents. We did have 2 at Codgers Cove in 18, and I'll talk about one of those later. We did 2 drug search warrants in 18. We did 2 in 17 after doing 3 in 16. So that's been pretty steady. And we normally do those with Annandale and Wright County together. And I'll talk a little bit about what we're trying to do with the drug enforcement a little later as well. And only 1 assault reported in the city in 2018, which is pretty good news. Our most popular incident that people like to talk about are bridge strikes. We're down to 6 reported in 2018 after spiking it over 15 in 17. If you talk to Tom from Public Works, there was probably 22 because they were cleaning debris out from under that bridge all the time, but we didn't have a vehicle or anything, and we didn't know what happened.
Right. The key word is reported.
Yes.
The other people are too embarrassed to report.
Right. I do think the signs that the county has put up have helped, because we have had quite a lower number than we have in past years. And like last year and the year before, we got with Winstock, and they even posted on their Facebook page, hey, you know, beware of County Road 6 if you're coming from the north through Howard Lake. There's a low bridge and your camper will not make it. Significant incidents. We had the burglaries out at Codgers Cove where a number of campers were broken into. I think 6 were broken into, and they attempted to break into several more. MCIU came out. Dean Olson, one of the detectives for MCIU, came out and helped us with that. We did get some DNA, and we're working with the county attorney's office and finishing up that case right now. And I think we have a subject that will be charged in that case. So it's about, 15, 16 months later, but DNA is slow to get back from the lab. But once it gets back, then it's nice to know that we have a suspect now. DNA is kind of cool. It's kind of CSI stuff that you see on TV, and it worked right in Codgers Cove. You all aware of the city accountant fraud? Last year, the city staff found some discrepancies. Eric Anderson investigated that, and there were 2 felony charges. Then Aurora did an absolutely awesome job uncovering a lot of that stuff, and then Eric just had to write the 25 or 30 subpoenas to get all the records. But they're having their next hearing here at the end of the month, and that'll be an omnibus hearing. Or is it July 1st? I'm sorry. There's an omnibus hearing where they go over evidence and procedures and what evidence is going to be admitted and what is not and that kind of thing. So that's the next step where that case is now.
Do you attend that, or?
Not generally. That's pretty much the attorneys working that with the judge. The final one was the case with our high school teacher, Andrew Roosevelt. The school reported to Derek, having the SRO down there was good. Possible inappropriate relationship. We were able to get some things off the student's phone, that we were able to get a warrant in Elk River for the teacher's house, and we found some deleted files on some drives that Wright County Forensic Analysis was able to retrieve those deleted files, and we were able to get 4 counts of criminal sex conduct, 4th degree, against the teacher. He pled guilty to 2 of them, and he has sentencing on the 31st. So that was pretty quickly resolved, thanks to, again, the evidence we got from the search warrant of computer devices that he thought he had deleted. But those guys, those forensic guys can get some stuff. So I think that was a success story. I mean, it's a sad thing to have happen, but to be able to work the case like that, and Elk River Police was great. They helped us out. The Sheriff's Office was great. They helped us out. Again, teamwork when we're working a case like that. Some of our initiatives, you're aware of the Sex Trafficking Task Force. We've been a member for about 16, 17 months now. We did one operation last year in Worthington. Eric and I went on that, and then I was on the Final 4 operation. That's technically 2019. Arrested 58 and rescued 28 victims. So it was a pretty good operation. Contrary to what people think, these guys weren't coming in for the Final 4. We didn't arrest a bunch of guys from Chicago or Florida. It was mostly local guys. And from surrounding communities and counties. I think there's one from Litchfield. So it's here, and it's happening here, and there's people doing it here. And we're working with the county. I don't know if they're going to end up joining or not, but we're working with the county. I think there's interest, Sean, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So part of it is how those memorandum of agreements are worded and things, and we'll just see. I think we probably do have somewhat of a problem in the area. We just don't know. And we'd like to do an operation in this area as well. Crisis intervention training, we were able to get 5 slots for that, 40-hour training to help us deal with mentally ill people. Some of the best training I've been to, probably $5,000 worth of training that we got for free on scholarship. So Anderson has gone, Thompson, Shapanik, myself, and then Coots will go later this summer. And so 5 of us will be training that. Pretty good training. We do have Narcan now. In 18, we got Narcan as a result of 4 different incidents in 17. where Narcan was used to bring someone back, and we didn't have it, the ambulance had it, and then we didn't have an incident in 18. We saw a bigger uptick in meth again, and heroin use that we're seeing went down. That's specifically Howard Lake. I think countywide it might be a little different, but right here where we're at, meth is back up, we're seeing more of that, and heroin's down. Countywide drug enforcement, partially something that goes with being on Zerker. We have worked with Annandale very closely on almost all our drug operations. We help each other out in our cities because of our small police departments. We work with the sheriff's office on anything out in the townships, but now that we're all on Zerker, we're working on some of that information sharing outside of just the operations, where we can see each other's intelligence reports, and we'll figure that out. That's still a work in progress, but I'm confident that that's something that will help us better work drug cases, sharing all the information amongst all the agencies. Facilities and equipment, we transitioned to Zerker at the end. I'm going to show you what it looks like. I'm really excited about this. As with anything, when it's new, you're frustrated because it takes me 25 minutes to do a traffic stop that used to take 5 because I'm trying to figure out which button to push. But I can see the positivity. I had an incident. Deputies were tied up. It was the south part of Victor Township, and I had never been in contact with these people. I had never been to that residence before. And I was able to pull up. We had never had contact. About 40 incidents. Before I got there, I knew that the individual had some mental health issues, had some substance abuse issues, and could be very erratic when you dealt with them. And so that, to me, is what's awesome about having this system with all the agencies together, because I can get that information. It helps us with officer safety. We got a new squad camera, the same kind that the sheriff's office uses. We're going to get one more when we get our new squad, and then we'll be all on the new system. Right now we'll be at 1 and 1. We got new AEDs because the ones we had were not the same brand as what the fire department had and what was in the city and other places. So now we have all the same batteries, all the same pads. We all have the same system. And then for our evidence room, we got a barcode and scanner that will make Eric's job a lot easier. He's doing 100% inventory right now, and we don't have anything barcoded. That is a pain in the butt, right? But he will just be able to go through and scan things in and out of the evidence room now, and that's going to be a really good time saver for him. People like pictures, right? School resource officer, that was at St. James just last week. I think I'm in there too, but we got to go out and do some safety classes for the kiddos at St. James. It's just one of the initiatives that we do. Derek really helps out, mostly with the high school kids. They have more incidents down there. Recently, we've been having a lot of vaping issues. And they can actually vape THC oil out of those vape machines. So it's dangerous stuff. And we just had a countywide meeting on that in the last week. But anyway, so Derek's still at the school. There he is at St. James, but most of what we see is at the high school with some incidents at the middle school. The reserves volunteered about 200 hours to us in 2018. There you have Pat Chiro and Tom Christensen, who were out at the Turkey Tagalong on Thanksgiving morning, providing traffic control. They support pretty much every event that we have in town, and they also go other places. Orono, I think, uses them for a parade. They'll go help Annandale with their parade, and they also go work Windstock. I know Tom's working Windstock this year. One of our favorite initiatives that the kids love is our AAA, you got an ice cream ticket. If they wear their helmet, they get a free ice cream cone at Dairy Queen. And you'll see us drive down the road and all the kids will come screaming out of their garages, put their helmets on, like, I'm gonna get some ice cream. They know they're getting ice cream in there. Or when we just got them last week, so a couple weeks prior, they're like, where's the ice cream? I got my helmet on. We don't have them yet. We have not received them.
They took their helmet off.
I'm not getting ice cream. NNO, another great event every August. I can't thank Myra, North Fork Meat, the Legion, the Lions, Dura, and I'm sure I'm forgetting someone, but you know, the community really comes together and supports that event. Oh, Kelly Baru. The whole community comes together and supports that event, and that's a really good event. I think we're going to do it at Lions this year, maybe? Switch the venue up back over to Lions. Okay, so if there aren't any questions, I'm going to hook up Zerker real quick and show you guys what it looks like. Okay, so this is the entire county. This is all the law enforcement units that are on duty right now are the blue. Okay, so what you've got is me here in City Hall, and I think Kyle's probably in City Hall as well, right now in the PD. So that's why he's right on top of me. But we can see everybody. Amazingly enough, until April of this year, 2019, we could not see anyone else, and dispatch didn't even know where we were. So from an officer safety perspective, that is huge. So now, if something happens, I slide off the ice into a ditch somewhere, dispatch knows where I am, and they can come find me, right? Or if I have an incident and wasn't able to radio in my location, at least they know where I am. To me, that's huge, right? We didn't have that before. And we could see everybody in the whole county. Incident in Concato the other day. Domestic, I went and helped a deputy on, and I saw he was flying through town, so I could just go right behind him, and we could go there together, because I knew where he was, right? It's just really good to have that now, and I can't believe we didn't have it in 2019, but we do, so I'm really happy about that. The other thing that we can see, and this can zoom way in too, so we can come way down on Howard Lake here. Yeah, 5304 is adjacent here to me. But then we also can see on the top, you can see all the currently active calls. So these are active calls that are currently ongoing. So they've got something in harassment in Maple Lake, something in Annandale, check welfare in Maple Lake, and a check welfare in Otsego. And then we can also see that Kyle is here at City Hall, and that I am in City Hall as well. So just really good system. We see the CFS as soon as it comes in. So as dispatch starts typing, we can now see it. On our old system, it would sometimes be several minutes. They'd hit send and we wouldn't get it for several minutes. So it's just a huge upgrade, and we're really happy to have this new system. So thank you for supporting us on that. And it's really going to help us work better with the county. So subject to any questions, that's all I have for tonight.
Awesome job.
Yeah,
Nice.
Awesome job.
Thanks, Dave.
you feel safe.
All right, well, Nick's doing that. We're just going through the consent agenda. We have a number of items on there. I'm going to read through them quickly, and then if there's anything we need to discuss, we'll pull it off and talk about it. But we consider accepting all reports and payment of claims, consider approval of various personnel appointments, consider approving updates to city personnel policy, consider resolution approving membership in the 4M fund, consider approval of resolution authorizing the transfer of funds, and consider resolution setting public hearing date for the creation of TIF District 1-20 Village Holiday. Is there anything of those items that we would like to discuss?
I just had a question. The resignation of Erica, will be same position type thing, 20 hours, or have you decided, or?
We've discussed it a little bit. We think we'll likely be posting with a very similar position, similar hours, likely in the next week or so.
Oh, okay.
Any other questions? Not really.
On the consider approving updates to the city personnel policy, was there any feedback from any members of Public Works in regards to, is this what's noted in here about on-call shifts and call payback for Public Works? Was any of that related to working additional hours, or was it
Go for it.
Yeah,
like
I can.
citywide cleanup or something like that if somebody felt they weren't being compensated properly?
So most of these were actually brought on not by a single incident, but over many
Over time.
issues, like brought up over time. Specifically related to on-call compensation, I'll have a follow-up resolution likely at the next council meeting proposing a specific compensation for
Okay.
on-calls. But that was, that's been brought up for the last several months, and even since I started, that, you know, it's just something that we get set, and it has been that way for 10 years, and we don't look at it until someone says, hey, we haven't changed our compensation in 10 years, I don't think this is right. And so then we are working on a market study for that too. So yeah, definitely brought up by
Okay.
Public Works and getting their buy-in on what it should be changed to.
All right, thank you.
But short story, you will see a recommendation soon to actually beef that up a little bit.
Yep.
Right.
Okay. Anything else, council?
No.
All right, we'll entertain a motion to accept the consent agenda then.
I'll make a motion.
We have a motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from the council? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item I, we have no presentations, public hearings, or related approvals. So we'll move to new business. Item A, consider request for private well placement at 5831 County Road 6.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Tonight we have Shep Sonstegard here with a request to place a well on 5831 County Road 6. Kind of zooming in here, this is the property immediately adjacent to our north water tower. I kind of want to go over a couple different considerations with this request. There has been some more recent information that I got from our city planner that I think will help you move forward with the request. But I wanted to break it down essentially into two separate items. First, in terms of planning and zoning, this property is currently zoned as urban reserve. And ultimately what that means is agricultural purposes. So hemp, I want Shep to talk about that a little bit because I think it's something new and something that we might not know a lot about, and I think that's interesting. But in terms of land use, there's no considerations in front of the planning commission or council. This is a permitted use of that property. In fact, going a step further, Shep has already received his approval through the state because it is something that's regulated at the state level. The other item before us really revolves around the well request itself. The way that our city code is written, any property that's within city limits should be part of the city utility network, and that's inclusive of water and sewer and stormwater. We have had some exceptions to that. Some industrial users are on private wells. Properties that were annexed after the fact that were previously part of the township were allowed to remain on their private well and private septic. And something that we actually just discovered through the city planner, who unfortunately just got back to me today with the request after the packet went out. This is also a permitted request as well. Provided that the use stays exclusively to agricultural purposes, a well would be permitted. Anytime there is an improvement in as much as a structure or something that is non-ag related, then that has to come back before the council for either approval to stay on a well or it has to go on to the city system. So the staff report that you have in front of you kind of weighed the pros and cons of whether or not this should be part of the city system. Ultimately, the approval in front of you is that you still need to hear the request because it's still kind of a unique situation. If you desire, you can seek a conditional use permit. That being said, I'm not recommending a conditional use permit because the actual use in front of you is already permitted. And when we see a use come before us that is not, there's other triggers that would follow, such as a building permit or rezoning that would ultimately bring it back to you anyway.
Well, and does the zoning of urban reserve even allow for a building?
No, that's exactly my point. It does allow for ag uses, so you might see like a barn or something of that nature, and even that technically would still have to come back for reapproval. But what we have in front of us is almost clear cut and allowed use. You
The
could,
well, you mean.
yes, yep. Where we've dealt with this in kind of a different area, the golf course is also on a private well for servicing the golf course, but that has improvements on it. So the council had to give specific approval for like the clubhouse, for example. Here, where we're looking at just ag use, it's much more straightforward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 'cause it's just for irrigation.
Exactly.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yep. So ultimately, you do need to approve the well because that's part of our city ordinance.
Okay.
I do welcome Shep Sonstegard just to talk a little bit about the request because it is something a little bit new and different, if that's okay. Just take a few minutes to
Yeah.
describe that.
Why not?
Alright, so just want to introduce myself. I'm Shep Sonsgaard. I'm a licensed hemp grower in the state of Minnesota here. So I'm growing 2 acres over on off of County Road 6. It's 5763 County Road Southwest, or County Road 6 Southwest. This is my first year in the pilot program for the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. This is the 4th year that they've had this program in place in the state. And then with the new Farm Bill, it's actually, you can grow hemp nationally. This year it's still managed at the state level, so I have all my permits and things like that through the state. I've also I've printed some off and I can give you copies, just some highlights from the meeting back in January. They do an annual meeting for the Department of Agriculture, just kind of going over what's going on in the industry, how many people are planting. They also have records, of everybody that's growing in Minnesota, as well as contact information on their website. But just wanted to talk about it a little bit. So this is my first year growing in the state here, and the 2-acre plot, I would need a well essentially to irrigate it. I know we've looked at potentially irrigating with city water, and it's just significantly more expensive than using a well. It would be
That's an understatement.
yeah, I would be in a really tough spot. I don't know if I'd be able to irrigate then. But again, just thank you for letting me speak today and to come and talk with you and ask for your permission for this well. Essentially, without it, my business can't really get off the ground. And right now, so you plant indoors for about 4 to 5 weeks, just kind of ensure that the plants are strong enough to put in the field. It's a very labor-intensive crop for the specific way I'm growing it. And what I'm growing for is for the flower, which essentially I'll send that to a processor. They'll process it for the CBD, which essentially what that is, it's a compound that's found in hemp, and it can be used in a number of different ways. It's in cosmetic products that reduce inflammation. It's also used in some FDA drugs, like there's a FDA-approved drug called Epidiolex, and essentially what that does, it helps treat symptoms of epilepsy, such as seizures. And so there's three processors in the state that I'm looking at selling to currently. And I just wanted to come and speak with you, and if anyone has any questions about hemp or CBD, I'm happy to answer those as well.
So do you own the land then?
So my mom owns the land, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
And then do you own the other spot where you're already, because you said, is there another location further down?
So I'm growing indoors currently.
Oh, okay.
So I have indoor space where I'm growing, and then in about 4 weeks or so, just kind of depending on the weather, I'll transplant into that field.
And does hemp require more irrigation than a normal, because nobody else in the area irrigates like corn or beans or anything.
Sure. So it's similar to like vegetables. So like Untieds over in Waverly and Montrose, they lay down a plastic and then it has drip line underneath to irrigate it, and that's the most effective way to irrigate it. You keep the most water and the most moisture, and so it's very similar. I'm actually getting a piece of equipment from them, which is really nice because they're right next door basically, so that helps out a lot. And there's I think last year there's about 709 acres in Minnesota, and for the specific product that I'm growing for, there's about 70 acres, but it's expected to be a really significant increase this year.
So then when is your harvest season?
So it'll be late September, early October, and mostly that's done by hand. Essentially, you're going through with weed whackers with like metal blades on the bottom, and then you're throwing those on a tarp, throwing them in the back of a truck, and then taking it somewhere to dry. Like a lot of people hang them in barns, and then it takes a few weeks for it to dry out with some airflow, and then you're shucking it and then sending off all that material to a processor.
Interesting.
Are there any type of agricultural pollutants that have to be considered with runoff or anything? Are you treating once they're transplanted out, or is it's just irrigation from
It's just irrigation.
water?
Yep, just irrigation.
Interesting.
Shep, could you also just at least briefly touch on the difference between CBD and THC? And what
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, obviously they look somewhat similar to another cannabis plant, marijuana. But so the biggest difference, and the state tests for this as well. So, to be classified as hemp, it has to be less than 0.3% THC. And I can give you guys copies of this, but with the state meeting back in January, the average THC level is 0.14, so it's well below that. And to date, 3 years in, they haven't had a single grower fail the THC test, which is obviously great news. And so what the state does 30 days before harvest, they come and cut the top off 30 plants and go get it tested. And basically, if you're over that 0.3% THC, you have to destroy the entire crop. And if you're below it, you're fine. So it's, again, nobody's failed yet, so that's always good news. But really the biggest difference, so CBD is another compound that's found. in hemp. It's also found in marijuana, just in really small quantities. So it's kind of the reverse of marijuana. So it's got high CBD and almost no THC. Whereas, you know, the THC, basically what that is, that's the psychoactive component in marijuana that gets people high. CBD doesn't have any of those effects. And hemp, I mean, you could burn 1,000 acres of it and nothing would happen. I mean, it's, it literally would have no effect on somebody standing next to it other than, you know, coughing because of the smoke in general. But so basically, like, I know, so I personally use a CBD product like an ointment on my knee, just because if I get inflammation from, you know, working out or running or something like that, it helps. I know other people that have used it, you know, for back pain as well. You know, there's, like I said, there's that FDA-approved drug called Epidiolex, and that's just in the last 2 years, I think that's been approved, and that's a really, you know, fascinating thing that they're doing. They're doing a lot more research on CBD. They're starting to infuse it in drinks and things like that, and food. I think Carl's Jr. has a burger you can order, actually, that has CBD in it. So it's,
Of course they do.
That seems kind of like counterproductive, but.
yeah, exactly. I mean, they're putting in quite a few things now, and it's really getting big, especially in Minnesota. Yeah, they're expecting a really large increase in growing this year.
So eventually, do you plan on maybe even expanding into the other 14 acres?
Yep, so that's the plan. So this year, 2 acres to start. Next year, I'd like to do 3 to 5. And then hopefully within the next 3 to 5 years, I'd like to be able to get up to all 14. So that's the plan. Obviously, you know, depends on a lot of factors, but that's the goal right now.
So Green Acres renting this land from your?
So they were farming it for my mom, and then so David actually, he's helping me out, and Kevin's helping me out a little bit too. He's kind of out of commission for a little bit.
Yes.
But so David, we were just meeting yesterday, actually talking about the well a little bit. But he's helping me out as far as tilling and helping me lay the plastic mulch.
Dave's my brother-in-law.
Is he really?
Yeah.
No kidding. Okay, I didn't know that.
Oh, that's nice.
So do you already know on the property where the well is going to go and give that? I mean, not that it really matters to us, I guess, but I'm curious.
We have a picture
Yep.
of that in the packet.
Yep, and I got a few of these if you guys want one. It's just behind the fence on the house right next to the field. And that's, you know, I actually just met with David yesterday and say, you know, just to double check, like, this isn't going to get in your way, right, if I put it here. And
I'm sure he'd tell you if it was.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, yep, so no, everything, this was the last kind of permit I needed to, you know, get as well to get kind of off the ground here. And like I said, I got planted indoors last week and got about 3,800 plants. I think right now I'm at about 3,600 that have germinated. And yeah, the nice thing about this is when you grow it indoors and then you transplant it, and if you're able to irrigate, your success rate's a lot higher. You're able to, you know, if there's a drought, it's easy to lose the crop. It's you know, it's a bit more labor intensive than corn and soybean, like I stated earlier. It's grown a lot like a vegetable, basically.
I know in the packet it mentions suggestions of, you know, having signage on site, fencing,
Yep.
cameras, notifying the local PD.
Yep.
What are things that you have to worry about? I mean, when somebody says, well, you got to have, you know, fence or you got to have cameras out there. I mean,
Sure.
is there a concern of somebody coming in and harvesting something or getting the wrong idea about it? Or
I mean, so like I said, it looks similar, but the biggest thing, what I've talked to other growers and with Margaret Wyatrowski over at the State Department, and they don't require you to put up a sign. It's beneficial to, I think, 'cause that, you know, basically you can state this is an industrial pilot program through the state of Minnesota. You know, no trespassing. Basically, this will not get you high. That's essentially, I mean, that's the biggest misconception, is that it's the same thing, and it's, you know, it's not. It looks similar, but it's.
is there any feedback coming back down from the state that there's been incidents, though, where that's been an issue?
Yeah, it's been pretty minimal from what I've heard. I've only talked to other farmers, and it really didn't come up at the meeting. Most people are putting up signage. Some people are doing, you know, trail cameras, which is kind of what I intend to do. Yep. And if I see somebody trespassing or whatever, I would, you know, notify Howard Lake Police and, you know, just go from there.
Okay. So do we need to do like well inspection, or do we require anything?
No.
And if ever the property, let's say, gets redeveloped and goes R1 or something, then
Yeah,
we would
I could see.
remember that there's a well there that has to be kept off.
I could see a couple hypotheticals playing out over time. 5 years from now, Shep could be very successful and have 14 acres and decide to take the next step to like enrich his own product. At which time he would still have to rezone, get a building permit, go through the process to like essentially build a factory.
Oh, I see.
Again, we have processes in place that, force him to come back to the city for approval at that time to reconsider that well. A similar scenario, if at such time it's not successful or he just decides to go a different direction and this is made into homes, it's almost the same consideration where you still need to go through a platting process, you need to go through a rezoning process. In terms of the well specifically, there's actually a state statute that forces you to disclose the well. And that's a private matter, it's not something that we need to be involved with necessarily, but it is something that exists at the state level to make sure that that well is tracked and if it's abandoned, it's capped properly and that sort of thing.
Other than that, any questions? No. All right. Well, thank you again for letting me to speak.
Thanks for the
Speak
information.
with you. Yeah,
Even though most of our
absolutely.
questions weren't about a well. But
No worries. I'm happy to answer questions, and I'm around if anybody wants to stick around and ask more questions after. I'll be here. So.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, council, I think unless there are other questions or do you have anything to add, Nick? Or you're good?
No, again, just to be clear, in front of you is the well request. You do need to act on that. As discussed at the top, you could require a conditional use permit. I don't think that's necessary at this point.
Overkill.
Yeah. So we're looking for the approval of the well.
Okay. So we will entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion approving the request for private well placement at 5831 County Road 6.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from the council? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Good luck.
Yeah. And Shep, it's nice to have you around, but don't feel obligated either, honestly.
Well, sure. I mean, I'm around if anybody has more questions. Nick has my information
Yeah.
too, and again, anything you guys want, any more questions, anything you need from me, just let me know.
All right.
Thanks. I really
Thanks.
appreciate it.
Yep.
It'll be a while. I'll send it to a processor. Like I was saying earlier, I got 3 that I'm looking at right now. There's a lot up in the air for this industry, especially at how many acres are getting planted this year. So there's 3. There's a guy in Egan. There's a guy on the border of Minnesota and Wisconsin. I think it's on the Wisconsin side. It's in Osceola, and then there's one in Waseca as well. Yeah, no, it's growing for sure. So it's really interesting. It's exciting.
Pretty fun to watch.
Yeah, absolutely.
There
I'm
was a
excited.
big article in the Minneapolis paper about it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. No, it's really starting to take off this year.
Yeah. Sounds like it might be pretty good stuff.
Yeah, I hope so.
All right, let's move on to item B under new business. Consider drainage and culvert issue of property owner Steve Lagergren.
Yeah, I'll start.
this.
What's that? Yeah, I figure I'll just give a little background. Ultimately, this comes before you as a request of property owner Steve Lagergren, who is with us tonight. He's done a methodical job of putting together some materials that I'll pull up on the tablet in a second as well. Fundamentally, this is a topic that is not new to the council. We've been tracking it over the last year or so. This really results from the 2018 paving project with the mill and overlay of Imhoff. At that time, a new culvert was replaced in the location of a previous culvert, and there has been some disagreement in terms of whether it's needed and its impacts to the property that Mr. Lagergren owns. So without getting too far into the weeds with that, ultimately what we considered back in December was kind of 2 different considerations. One was engineering. We had Josh Halverson, our city engineer, review the existing culvert, what the intended purpose was and why it's there. He also looked at the surface drainage on the property as well, because you can't dispute that water is going on to Lagergren's property. There's some cost information in your packet as well that shows a pretty hefty cost to put in a 15-inch storm sewer line underground to redirect that water. The second, in terms of kind of the legalities with it and why we have Mike Corey with us here tonight, is in terms of what we can and can't do with that easement. Ultimately, what this is considered is a prescriptive easement, which allows us to use that property for drainage. The onus goes back to the property owner to determine how to best make use of that property, whether that's putting a structure underground, redirecting around the certain size to the edge of the property, or some other accommodation. But again, from a legal standpoint, we have that right to use that property in that manner. Somewhat unfortunate, but that onus goes back to the property owner to figure out how to best accommodate that. And really what that's resulting from is just using that property in that manner for 20 years plus or minus. Steve has been good to work with. He's been, like I said, incredibly methodical in terms of have we considered alternatives. Ultimately, we have opted not to do any sort of alterations to the existing culvert pattern, because if we do, that does open the city up to undue liability to surrounding property owners. So as we've recently discovered, Mr. Lagergren has plugged that culvert and studied to see what the consequences have been, good, bad, or otherwise. That already has potentially opened the city up to new and different liabilities than we have with just keeping the issue and the conditions the same. So in front of us, when we met just a couple weeks ago with Mr. Lagergren and a proposed property or purchaser of the property, we had discussed the option of a hydrologic study of that culvert to determine whether or not we could basically keep it plugged or plug it permanently. At least verbally, I was pretty gung-ho to see that move forward.
I mean, you've never seen a study you didn't like.
Right? That's true. But we did kind of shy away from that for a few different reasons. First, after talking to Josh about it, that would only study the specific culvert. And already over the last couple months, we've seen other property owners along Imhoff come forward with some concerns over drainage. In fact, we have a council member here that kind of came forward with some similar drainage issues in his own property. So we know that there's other things going on. Years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, not necessarily related to that. And at this point, we don't know if what we're looking at is related, if it's even part of the same watershed pattern. So a study seemed like a good idea. But if we're going to spend $6,000, first, I don't have the approval to spend $6,000 without you guys approving it. Second, that seemed like a steep cost to study one single culvert when I was hopeful that it would do all of Imhoff.
So when you say $6,000 to study only one culvert, explain that to me.
Ultimately, what Josh would look at, he would look at the water flow patterns that immediately impact that culvert.
Okay.
So that's the north-south culvert, not the east-west.
Correct.
So you got two culverts right
Yeah.
there.
So to do that whole issue, because we also have another water issue, probably half a mile down to the west,
Yeah.
would be an additional cost. So again, that was a check for me to say we got to come back to you guys to consider and approve that. So ultimately tonight, there's two considerations. One, Steve has the right to be heard. There's a lot of nuance in this, and you guys should hear him out. The second is the actual consideration of that hydrological study into what scope.
Okay.
And if you have any other questions or concerns before we open it up or not, I do want Mike to jump in, or Josh, if you have any other comments before Steve, but otherwise.
Yeah, if I can add, sorry about that. If I can add just a couple of things. The grandfathered in rights, if you will, or the prescriptive easement rights that we have on the north-south culvert over Steve's lot are fairly wide-ranging. And by that I mean we have been draining water on that property for 20 years, could be 30 years, 40 years, I don't know, probably when Imhoff was built, back when it was a township road and the property was in the township. That gives us a right to continue to drain the water there. To me, that's somewhat important because if we have a really heavy rain year, we've got enough history to know this doesn't regularly flood, and therefore that falls more into the category of act of God than something that we did. If we move that drainage and we move it somewhere else, we don't have that history of having all that water flow through that same drainage path, the new drainage path, if you will, or maybe we expand the existing drainage path farther to the west. If we have a flooding situation, we're going to have a harder time showing that it's simply an act of God rather than we caused that because we put new water there. That's the problem with changing historical drainage. When you change it, you run the risk that you're going to be liable for some flooding that might occur, and we can't differentiate it between, did we cause that? Did Mother Nature cause that? We've got enough history with this one that we know somewhat what its parameters were, parameters are. So from our perspective, legally, if we move this drainage somewhere else, we run the risk that if there is a problem, we're going to be found responsible for it and ultimately maybe paying damages. On this property right now, we've got a defined swale that we've been going through for some 20 years. You can see it on the aerial photos. It's been there for an awful long time. The property owner can move that swale and redirect it on his own property. He just can't plug it. So he probably can't direct it onto somebody else's property. Under Minnesota law, I don't think that would be allowed.
Which you're saying plugging a culvert at that side is essentially doing, is that what you're saying?
Yes, either way, either plugging the culvert or taking it from the south side of the road and sending it over to his neighbor's property, redirecting it to drain on the neighbor's property. It's on his property. At this point, he's going to have to deal with it one way or the other. And that raises a question that I think is adequately shown in the materials that Nick put in the agenda packet. There is room, if you move that drainage farther to the west, there is room to build a house on the site. It's not ideal, no question, but the lot ultimately can be used. That would be the property owner's expense, not ours. We have the right to keep the culvert where it's at, drain the water in the same manner we've been draining it. Property owner has the right to move that drainage, but not block it. So we have to have he's got to allow us the ability to continue draining the water that we're draining. So my preference from a legal standard would be keep the historical drainage. It is the safest. It reduces our potential liability the most. If we move that drainage, we increase our potential liability, and we have a lot of unknowns that we really won't know until we get a lot of heavy rain.
So the natural pattern of that, though, is if enough water accumulates on his property, it sheds to the lake, right? I mean, it could follow that path right down to the lake. So there's nothing saying that that can't be improved on within his own property, either above ground or down and straight to the lake.
Correct. As long as I don't know what the DNR requirements are.
I don't either.
But in terms of could he move it out of its current path on where it runs
Within
on
his
his
own
property?
property.
Absolutely, as long as he still provides drainage so that our water can drain freely. So he can move it to the edge of his property and run it down the edge of the property line. We wouldn't have a problem with that as a city.
Because when I drive by that, I drive by that property daily, 2 times a day for years. It's low, and if you're going to improve on it, you have to build that up likewise. I don't know what the folks that bought the property next to it, but that whole thing's got to be built up anyway. So I just see that water going.
Something needs to happen if you're going to build upon the property.
Yeah, we're seeing that with the new homeowners on the north side there.
Yeah.
It's a mess.
And I get into that a little bit too in the staff report. As part of any building permit request for a house, there's certain submittals that we need to see that address that. It's the drainage plan, it's a landscaping plan, it's the elevation of the house. Our specific job is not to determine if it's buildable or not. We look at zoning, we look at building code.
Good. I just had one question for you, Mike. Sorry. So we talk about the natural flow of the water over the property and over a number of years, sort of that historical piece of it. But what about, and I don't want to steer your thunder, Steve, but what about Steve's argument that that culvert was blocked for a number of years? And I mean, I'm assuming it wasn't 100% blocked, there still was water getting through, but does that
70%.
sort of historical piece of it still stand regardless of the condition of the culvert?
I believe so. So, and the drainage law is really what we call common law case law. It comes out of the courts rather than out of a particular statute. So our rights to this property, if we don't have anything on the property records or recorded easement, I don't think we do. I haven't specifically checked, but I'd be very surprised to find one. The courts we in essence use common law, which are court-created doctrines, one of which is if we run water on that property for 15 years, if the property owner allows us to, then we have a prescriptive easement, which is the law will recognize that right. Property owner can't stop us from doing it, and we have the right to drain the water that we have been draining at any given point in time. So it's, even though it may wax and wane, what it really comes down to is what watershed drains through that culvert. There are times your culverts will naturally sediment up, you come back in, you clean them out, that's maintenance. I believe the law will recognize that and say, and will not penalize us for saying, oh, at one point it was 70% sedimented, you now have lost 70% of your drainage rights. Courts won't do that, we're still draining the same amount of property. It's much like when you go to clean out a ditch, the state will let you bring it back to its original elevation, not any lower. And that's similar to our drainage easement here. We have the right to drain the amount of water that's draining at the size pipe we're draining. I wouldn't advise that we increase that flow, but if we clean it out back to its original capacity, I think we're well within our rights.
And did we increase the flow or increase the size of the pipe when we did the same?
Josh, could you address that a little bit with the actual project itself?
Yeah, Council, if I may, no additional drainage area has been created by performing or installing this new culvert. What was the second part of the question?
That was it. I just asked if when we replaced the culvert, if it was size the
So
same.
then hydraulically with the capacity of the pipe, obviously capacity is very dependent on the slope of the pipe. The slope of the pipe is near, as Nick has pulled up, the same elevations, and the size of the pipe is also exactly the same, even considering the pipe material. So it's hydraulically the same capacity as well, from existing to the precondition of installing this new one.
Okay. And the AV culvert, as it's marked on this, is the same too, right?
Correct. The one under Ingram.
Ingram, yeah.
Yes, that one has not been changed or touched.
Okay.
Nick, when you mentioned that you are fielding some other concerns, would that be the folks in like the Willow Court area, their backyards, or you said half a mile to the west?
So it's just outside of city limits.
Oh.
Maybe I have my directions wrong. And again, I don't know if they're related or not.
I didn't know.
I have no idea. Do you guys have any other questions?
No,
Then we can
I'm
actually
good.
move into
Nope.
that.
No.
Okay. Yeah, Steve,
Yeah.
come on up.
Okay. Sorry, I just want to get through some of that technical stuff. Your stuff's technical too, so.
Well, not really. All right, first of all, thank you for allowing me to come here tonight. As you know, my name is Stephen Logergan. I'm grandson of Edward and Louise Logergan. Maybe some of you guys are old enough to know Al Munson. I know you are. Remember Edward Logergan used to manage Standard Lumber Company, lumberyard just down the road, and then Louise worked into her 80s at the insurance, at Bergstrand Insurance, and then I have many happy memories of playing in the lake on their property with my brothers and such. So again, thank you. So yeah, my problem statement, from my perspective, very simple. Having this new culvert in, and even the previous one, has resulted in basically a loss of property value, and that's to me it's undisputable based on the results of I'm getting feedback from potential buyers. And then the other one is property damage from flooding running across the middle of the property. I've got standing water, running water. I've got soil erosion on the bank, soil and debris basically being deposited on the property. Just kind of what you'd think. So as far as property value loss, my first example is the first potential buyer, which Nick, you met, and Aurora, you met at the last meeting here, Phil Spangers and his wife. He's actually a police officer from Medina. I think I posted his information in the packet. He and his builder, we've agreed kind of on a price, got a kind of at least a verbal purchase agreement going, but his builder, Timothy Ladden, at this point has recommended that it is not a buildable lot, not something he recommends building on, not without significant changes or blocking off of the culvert and or moving the culvert. And also he goes in to talk a little bit wanting to put, needing to put in fill for a driveway and fill in the low spots, basically bring that whole lot up higher, so that the risk of flooding isn't going to be an issue for his client, that being Phil. Then I've got another example, potential buyer Craig Kryson, maybe beat up his last name. On the 13th here of the month, he called out of the blue, and I explained to him the possible purchase agreement with the other buyer, and I had to explain to him the culvert situation, as I do to everybody that calls. Craig reviewed the property. I gave him permission to go on down. Yeah, I said, look it over, check everything out, see what you think. And he came back and said, yeah, I like it, but my God, that culvert right in the middle, what are we doing here? He said he would be interested in buying it, but that's with the idea that the culvert could get moved at least, and if not, else plugged off completely. So he said no, and then I had a third buyer out of the blue call, and I gave him the same spiel, and he said, yeah, let me know. Everybody's on hold, I'll put it that way. So if you flip over, here's some pictures from last year. I had a realtor, Barb, just down the road, from Edina Realty. So I didn't have direct interaction with the clients, but she gave me feedback saying, yeah, this scared the hell out of a lot of potential buyers, and why wouldn't it? So every time it rained, you got this river running down through that you see there in the picture, especially the left-hand picture. That was not there when I first started taking care of the property back in 2009, 2010. That culvert, as far as I knew, was all plugged off. In fact, you can barely even see it. It was underneath a great big bush. So I had plans of, like, I'm just going to get rid of that area, fill it in, because it was a nuisance for me to kind of mow down in that little area where the older culvert was. But anyhow, that's some pictures of the damage there. And if you flip over to the next slide, Aurora, here's some pictures of the bank. I took them this fall. I've been taking a few pictures. It's kind of tough to picture. You almost have to walk it, and then you can see it's kind of created a really dangerous situation. We've got exposed roots now. Didn't see it was a hole there before. It was buried with a lot of bushes and a lot of stuff, so I did some cleanup on it this fall. But it certainly has increased with that newer culvert and a kind of a resurgence in water flow. The next picture just kind of shows where we're at today. It's a real dream to look at. A nice eyesore sticking absolutely dead center right in the middle of the property, and it just constantly just holds water right there. That being a low spot. Then subsequent pictures just show roughly how centered it was. I don't know what the original thought process was with placing it where it was, but if it could have been just 30 feet to the north and west, that would have been a whole different deal, running right down the lot line. Tax value, I'm taxed at it as if it didn't have the culvert. You can see from 2009, it's floated anywhere from 92,000. It went up to 99,000. It's back down to 68.5 now. It's going to go up to 74 next year, which is right in keeping with what Lot 2 sold for. That Lot 2 sold for 79,000. It does not have the culvert. I know Lot it was like 6 or 7 down where Terry Osterlund bought that lot. That lot went for 74 or something back in 2014. So the numbers aren't off, but that is without considering you have a floodplain or a flood zone running right through it, as if you're trying to build. I jokingly joked around with Nick and the guys saying this isn't Falling Waters with Frank Lloyd Wright, where you're going to want to see water going down through your living room. I get what he's saying, where you want to reroute it around that, but you always have this liability. So the water flow path here, Nick encouraged me to go down there, and we walked the path, by the way, about 2 weeks ago. We walked the whole thing, kind of see, what is the risk factors here. And I think when you get out there and you walk around, and you kind of see what's going on, where the water's going. The risks that I could see, the buyer could see, I can't speak for anybody else, don't seem to be there. So then I went and talked to this Dwayne Pertello, hadn't met him, went and talked to him like a day or two after, it was a couple weeks ago. Kind of got him up to speed, who he is, nice guy. His only issue was his driveway was basically falling apart. If you flip it over to the next picture, Especially it's got his wife upset because she can barely clear the potholes in the driveway here. He's got something going on with the plastic culvert there. There's two culverts. There's a plastic culvert, which is the main culvert that's draining all the water from the surrounding area. The bigger culvert, ironically, just does the ditch kind of just to the north and east of him, which is in that upper right-hand picture. But the one that's tied into the main line that comes in off the road, on the other side of the road, that to me was surprising. That's just a plastic culvert. And he let me in on a little secret, telling me that there was a fire underneath the culvert, and the plastic caught fire. And you know, if you know anything about this kind of plastic, these thermoplastics, once they get on fire, they're not easily put out. And so it's got a bunch of holes in it, as near as I can figure, underneath it, and that's causing perforation. So then he's getting these sinkholes in his driveway. So he's got, you know, damage from multiple things. I don't know if it's poor installation, however you want to call it. But met with him once, gave him all the information, came back this weekend, because I knew this last weekend here we had a great opportunity to come in the middle of a rainstorm and really observe what the heck's going on, see how bad this was. And I came there with it in mind thinking I am going to just see a river, just a gully washer. You know, it was right in the middle of that. We had almost a 1-inch rain here on Saturday. And it wasn't much different than these pictures. Surprisingly enough, his driveway was dry. His only complaint is he talked about the city talking about you guys were going to put in some rock there and put something at. He said that's never going to happen at this point. And you kind of reminded me when you were talking about action being taken. But
Wait,
yeah,
hold on a second. Is this this is the township property?
This is
right?
not in the city, so he probably doesn't.
So these aren't our culverts.
These aren't your culverts.
And that one looks like drain tile.
That one is. That's
It's
one
not a
version.
culvert. That's just drain tile, right?
Yeah, it's a very big. It's like a 16-inch diameter, maybe bigger.
Hey, Steve, we won't be able to hear you if you're not up to the microphone.
Oh, it's just you.
We can hear you. It's like the recording can't hear you.
This is like being in somebody's living room.
Yeah.
So if you can't hear me,
Yeah.
I felt the formalities of the microphone have long since gone here. But yeah, if that's kind of, to me, when I walked it, this is the only property that has what I would call is be a direct consideration where, you know, it's not going in the basement, it's not going in anybody's front yard. It literally rides along the side of the road, goes underneath culverts, not going across the road. It all has a proper place to go. And then it gets to this gentleman's, goes to Dwayne's place. It goes underneath his culvert and then comfortably down the lake. So you take what is going to go from my property, which is direct drive, at 150 feet in distance, you drop 20 to 25 feet, racing down into the lake. You get all the pollutants, all the runoffs, all the phosphates, everything you've got. Versus this path, which is almost over a quarter mile, and you get this nice cleansing effect going through these grassy ditches. And it goes over his rock beds on it. So to me, from a cleanliness standpoint, this is much more beneficial to keep it as it was, if you will, plugged.
But hold on a second.
And I told Dwayne, by the way, I told him it's plugged. Do you have any problem with it? Have you seen more water than normal? He said, no, can't see any difference.
So, but wouldn't removing that culvert make his situation worse?
That's what I would have thought.
So backing up,
I mean, not
Dwayne's
that-
property was mentioned almost in passing to the effect of we don't know what's happening here.
Right, yeah.
Which is why we were suggesting the actual water study. I don't know if this is related to Lagergren's property or not. I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, how?
Right.
Well, that's just, I agree with you, Josh. I just went there to make observations from an engineering standpoint. I'm like, I'm going to see this boots on the ground, actually see what is going on in the middle of a rain. And now every time I go back there and mow and watch, I look around, see what's going on, what's happening in the place. I'm meeting more of the people. But so I got Dwayne's number, got his permission, asked him, said, hey, are you seeing anything different? You've had it for over 6 months now where I've done this test plug. And he said, no, I haven't seen anything. And you guys know we had one hell of a spring runoff. I mean, we probably had one of the most record runoff snowfalls we've had in years. And we got through that with, from what I understand, no major impacts. Now, that's not a real test. Because when I originally brought this up to Josh,
Steve,
sorry,
excuse me, could you go up to the microphone because you're blocking cameras and the
Oh.
at-home
Yeah.
audience is not able to
Sorry,
hear you.
test. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So, so sometime around in the fall, after Nick said he can't talk to me anymore, I started talking with Josh. He's an engineer. I thought, well, engineer, let's talk here. And Josh, I don't put words in your mouth or anything, but basically what I got down to, I says, what is the possible holdup with why we can't block off one culvert? You have two. And I finally got you guys to open up the first culvert. That was a mistake in itself, which we didn't talk about. So, and he said, well, we just don't know. We don't know if we got enough capacity. In the one culvert that goes off to the northwest that goes under Imgren, the big question comes down to, do we have enough capacity? I said, well, how do we know that? Well, we can do a study, or we can actually test it, right? We can actually try it. Well, I said, in a way, I came off of almost 10 years of already testing that. Because I swear this thing has been plugged, or significantly plugged, because I'm there on the property, I mow the property and see it. And I've never dealt with what I dealt with last year with all the water run. So in a way, when you look at existing or pre-existing conditions, that culvert was plugged. So I got him to, he didn't agree. I told him what I was going to be up to.
Your testing sample is only your property. I mean, to be fair.
Yeah, I agree. It is, I got him, he didn't say, he didn't give me permission, he couldn't do that. He was very good, very professional. But I said, I'm going to do a test. You don't need, and he heard it. I'm going to do a test where I said, I'm going to block it off. And if something doesn't look right, I'm there and I can pull it right back out. So I did that. And time after time, I recorded what's happening. And is it a risk? I got to pull this thing out. It was risky, I agree. Maybe it wasn't the right thing, but here it was after almost a year.
Right.
Whatever. How we got to this point is there, but those are facts that we have now that we didn't have before. And at this time last year, I argued against Nick saying, what are we going to do? Can you give me a resolution? Can you give me some options? And if you flip down some pages here, I had given him some options. This is a decision analysis I went through. Flip down a couple more here. Gave him some options. This time last year, right after this was going in, I said, could we do this? You know, could we seal it off? Could we do a drainage above the ground, this and that? And like his attorney said, and he has said, I don't care what you do with it. That should never be an issue for us. Shouldn't matter on the sell point. You should have no problem selling this property at the value that it's already proclaimed at. Shouldn't be an issue. He saw it as no issue. I said, boy, I beg to differ, it's going to be an issue. I'm going to need to have some answers ready here to go when the realtor or anybody comes to look at buying it. What do I tell them? You know, is this a risk? And I still go back to the thought of, if I had lived there in a house, I don't think you would have pulled such a stunt of not even telling me about this, that you're going to replace an old culvert that was plugged with a brand new one and put a smack dab right there, without considering maybe moving it or making some changes at that time.
But it's in the same spot, right?
Yes, it's in exactly the same spot. When you're
okay.
given an opportunity to do something new, my argument has been all along, why not reassess what you have, and can we make it better? I always ask that question. Can we do something better that we didn't do today? Make it cleaner for the lake, make it better for the owner, make it better for the city? All these things should have come up, and their argument back has been, we don't have to do a study, we don't have to do anything because we're simply maintaining what we had. And my argument back on the maintaining, if it's such a perfect maintaining thing that we've been, and we're so concerned about all the residents that live on it, why were we never cleaning out that culvert? We never maintained the culvert, we maintained a plug and not a culvert. Because after all, what is a culvert? If a culvert's not an open tube that allows water to go through it, when it gets plugged off, it's a plug, right?
Well, but there was still water flowing through as far as we know, just
No,
probably not at the same.
no one has any evidence of that other than me saying, no, it was not flowing through there.
Well, you don't have any evidence to the contrary either.
I'm telling you, it didn't have the situation I had this last year. So I don't want to argue with
so
it.
to your earlier, but to your earlier point, if we're replacing a culvert and we're not seeing a problem on your property, what would even trigger anyone to do anything different? I mean, just to argue back at you.
Right.
Not that we need to argue about that because
we
wouldn't have done that anyway, but.
So here we are. I'm here to try to offer some options, a solution. I'm trying to understand this. I guess, does the city have any appetite to risk it and close it off? I mean, that to me is the cheapest. You guys get, overnight, you get a buyer coming in, he's going to put a $400,000+ home there. You get a new young family here. Isn't that what the city's all about, is trying to bring in new residents like that? He's a police officer from Edina. This is a great family. I put their letter that they wrote to the city pleading for basically the same thing. And then you guys got full tax value out of it. I mean, it's a cheap thing to do, and it seems low risk to do that.
But
versus
isn't
the
there? I
argument.
mean, there could potentially be. I kind of have to understand something. The culvert has been there for ever, correct?
I don't know if it's been there forever. I know my grandfather complained of it being put in sometime
Well,
back in
since
the
the
80s.
property has been part
Right.
of city limits
I mean,
at least.
And this is the
so prior to that, it was there.
I want to state too, this is the other thing that really bugs me. I mean, some of you guys knew my grandfather. He was a resident here. He complained about it, and Nick did some research, and he found out that he had complained about it as well. Now, the timing wasn't good. I don't know if Nick found out about this afterwards. But if there's a complaint on a situation that's already existing, why wouldn't you address it at that time when you're doing this building project that is going to be affecting the exact same property? You know, that should have been a consideration to come back and ask, say, hey, we recognize your grandfather had a problem with this culvert. Mind if we replace it and give you the same problem?
Well, and I'll
You know,
answer that, and I want Gene to finish the question, but my answer to that is, just because somebody doesn't like something doesn't mean it's wrong. So,
yeah,
I mean, that said, let's let Gene finish.
I guess what I was saying is that culvert has been there for, decades, probably.
Sure.
Yes,
You know,
yeah,
however it
that's
is.
Yep.
And so that's been kind of like, not technically, but that has become the natural flow of that water. So, but now our legal counsel is telling us if we move it and we've taken away that, we don't know the impact that moving that is going to have on, which could result in legal consequences to the city.
It seems like a long shot to me after walking in and seeing the property and talking to
But-
the actual homeowners.
Gene, I don't disagree, and keep it in mind, at least personally, I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with you, Steve. These could be three very good options. We had discussed as recently as 2 weeks ago a study to move forward with this. My opinion isn't changing on that. Maybe the conclusion of that is in fact that we can plug a culvert, but at least at that point we would have mitigated it with an actual
Right.
engineering study that would give our legal counsel and you as a council some backing to make that decision. Right now, we have a piece of plywood and a 15-inch culvert.
Right. Well, and I think, and I appreciate the options that you're giving us. I think we're kind of ignoring the obvious one, is that you fixed the problem on your property. So I just want that to be option, A on here instead of, because that is part of the issue that we're talking about. I understand what you're saying, and I understand what Nick is saying, but at the end of the day, what's happening on your property now is your responsibility to make it buildable. So for you to say it's not buildable is not entirely true. It's part of the truth. It's unbuildable as is, but so are a lot of lots that would be like saying, I'm not gonna buy a lot that has trees on it because it's unbuildable. Well, it is unbuildable with trees on it. You have to get rid of the trees. This is a little bit more extreme, so that probably isn't a fair comparison, but go ahead, Mike.
There is another fact that bears on exactly your point. And I went back and I looked at the Google Earth photos on this from 1991, and I went back and looked at the plat. The original plat, I don't remember when it was platted, but the original plat had a 33-foot wide public access lined up with, what's the north-south road?
Ingram.
Yep.
To the lake. That was originally platted and built up, and you can see it's built up a little higher than your lot is. So that was vacated by the township in 1988, before it was annexed to the city. Just that part from Imhoff south to the lake, the 33
What is now his property? You're saying?
Yeah, if you go
It
back a
became
couple
his
slides.
property.
Okay. I
Yes.
just want to make sure I understand where.
Yes, so that
what you're talking
33 feet became his property. So in fact,
okay.
it'd be easier for me to do this up here. And I realize it won't be, the people at home won't get it. But,
Yeah.
Can you guys see this?
We have it on in front of us. Yeah.
Okay, so, maybe I just move a little that.
Yep.
So this lot originally, you see this dashed line?
Yeah.
That was lot 2, I believe. 2 is perhaps over to here. I believe this dashed line was the edge of lot 1. So when the 33 feet, which is right here, you can see 33 up here, when that was vacated, it came from this plat. It did not come from that property.
Okay.
So all of that 33 feet comes back to lot 1 in 1988.
Okay.
Then the lots are subsequently reset. They're redivided. This lot, number 2, is made wider. They were originally smaller than 87 feet. I don't know what the exact amount.
62.
62. So it went from 62 to 87. This one, lot 1, goes from, it probably wasn't 57, it was probably a combination of these two, whatever that may be, 70, 82 maybe, to 90.94. But what happened is, where that drainage swale is, which was on the edge of the lot, it's now in the middle of the lot, not because we put it there, but because the property owner recombined
Gained the
lots.
access to that original.
Correct. And replatted these lots, or maybe not platted them, but re-subdivided them. So this lot is bigger, but the effect of it was to put the drainage swale through the middle of the lot.
Right.
That's what the genesis of the problem. That drainage swale was initially on the edge of the lot. And I don't blame the property owner, I would do the same thing, we would
Right.
pick up that 33 feet. But in picking up that 33 feet, you would want, initially, you would think you'd want to move that swale. There's some expense to that.
And the property owner, just to this other side, Pettit's, gained the same 33. They took a 66 and divided it.
No,
from
it's
where they
originally a
were
33 foot, no.
Because it's the road, it's the width of the road that was.
It wasn't a road, it was a public lake access. The road is 66 feet.
Yeah.
On the plat, this is 33 feet, because it came
Okay.
from,
It just so happens to be half of the width of the
because
road.
at the time the
Coincidental.
survey guys did, they explained to me that that was a 60 feet wide area of public access, and the city gave up both halves.
not on the plat.
Okay.
So there might have been, it could be that there was another plat over here. that
Yeah,
had
there's
33
something
feet.
more there that Pettit's had that they gained something as a half from that as well, so.
So this was originally platted as a 33
Yeah.
foot, and you got all of it back.
Right, I mean, I could see that makes sense with, at the time, putting the culvert in, at that location, but, you know, the times change, and we certainly have the ability to look at doing things a little differently.
But here's I think the critical issue. When the township vacated that public access and it went back to you,
Yep.
the drainage swale, whether it was vacated or not, stayed, and we got, if nothing else, grandfathered rights after 15 years to keep that drainage swale there. But it's incumbent on the property owner, when you're going to rearrange the lot, to make the lot buildable if you ultimately want to sell that lot. So originally you had a buildable lot in lot 1, but in making it bigger, you
See,
now.
all this was done before I got it, just so you
I
make it
understand.
sound like I did this.
No, I don't mean you. The
See, you gotta
property
remember, this
owner.
under my grandfather's
You or
era.
your predecessors
Yes,
in title.
yes. I get what you're saying.
In
yeah.
making the lot bigger,
Yeah.
they did not correct
Does-
the drainage swale and move it to the edge where it
So-
once was.
So backing it up a step here, though, did the city not have the ability to assess the very same thing you're just talking about now and say, could we move it over? We still get a culvert, but could we have moved it 33 feet over, put it down the lot lines?
Two reasons we can't. One, it was the township that vacated it, not the city. So when the vacation occurred, it wasn't our jurisdiction.
Yep.
But two, at this point, we have a drainage easement right where that runs. We can't go on your property and move it without your permission. You would have to authorize us to do it. But from our perspective, that swale is where it's always been.
I certainly would have given you authorization had I known
I
about
realize
it.
that, but that
You
swale
gotta
is
know
where
that.
it's always been. If you want to make your lot wider, which I would do in your
Well-
shoes or your predecessor's shoes, the question then is it incumbent on the city
But
to benefit the lot by moving it, or is the property owner the one who should pay to move it? That's
mean-
really the question.
doesn't the city own all this now? I mean, not the property, but don't they own the roadway and that road section?
Which one?
You
Imhoff?
talked about the county.
Imhoff,
Yeah, Imhoff and Imgren.
yes,
So it's the city's area, the city's property today, we're talking about today.
correct.
Could have, if you asked me, I would have given you full permission to move it, say 33 feet to the north and east. You
Right.
could have done that, right?
But Steve, I think you're missing the point. The
Oh.
point is, initially, it was the swale was in the right place.
Right,
When
but-
you wanted to make your lot bigger, it doesn't
didn't wanna
make
make
from
my
a.
lot bigger. It was
let me
already bigger.
finish. What your predecessor
Okay.
wanted to make your lot bigger, which they did.
Yep.
It doesn't make sense from my perspective, now you as a council need to apply your judgment, that the public should pay to move an easement that the city has that would benefit one property owner. I mean, it's an issue of benefiting one property owner versus what we call a public expenditure. So once that was vacated, some people, some city attorneys would argue, we can't pay for moving that swale because it's not a public expenditure. It benefits a private party, and the swale where it's at works the same way as it would when we move it. So we spend money to move it, and we gain nothing for the public.
But you had it dug up completely already. I mean, the money, Josh, chime in.
That's not
The
the
money
point.
was already
You're
spent
missing-
there,
that's
though.
not the
point.
I understand, but
Swale
I'm saying
is
the
what we're
money,
talking
you're
about.
talking
Water
about
over the
extra
dam.
money.
No, we're talking about the swale. So for us to move the swale, which is really the solution to your lot, it would not benefit the public, it would benefit you as a private property owner. From a legal perspective, I would have trouble with that as being a public expenditure. All our expenditures have to be public. If we had caused a problem, we would fix it. That would
Yeah,
be deemed a public
right.
expenditure.
I mean, and you have,
Josh-
But I think you're missing the other point that Mike's trying to make in that, and we'll be done talking about why we didn't fix it, because I think this is the answer to why we didn't move anything, because we can only direct water where we're already directing water, which is exactly what we did by replacing the culvert in the exact same spot. By replacing both of those culverts in the exact same spots, we're essentially only moving water where we're already moving water. So we're not going to move it now because we don't have access or right to push the water onto somebody else's property. Right?
Correct.
I mean, I'm not a lawyer.
Correct. So Steve could give us permission to, but then we get to the point of, is there a public benefit to moving it?
Right.
And the issue, the answer is that there's a private benefit, which would benefit your property, which,
doesn't the city gain taxes and a cleaner lake?
I would give you the same analogy by saying, if we build somebody an addition to their house, we get more taxes.
Right.
But that's a private benefit, it's not a public benefit.
Well, and besides that, I mean, as we've all discussed in this council many times before with zoning applications and CUPs and variances, we cannot base our decision on the increased tax value to our city, because that's
It's a
unfair.
consideration. I guess I just looked at it as like, all these are costs, whether they're private or they're public.
Well, right, but you want us to brunt all the cost, is the way,
I
is
did
what I'm
not
hearing.
say that in any of this here. On this decision analysis, in no uncertain terms, I say initial cost. I don't know who would bear the cost. On option A, I just simply say, as mentioned to me by, I can't remember the engineer's name, who was doing the street project at the time, said that it would cost about roughly $1,000. She just threw out a number. And then costs go up for option B, C, and D, which you can imagine they go up in the thousands. Yeah, and there's initial cost to property owner. I mean, basically I weighted based on cost, value to what I thought to the city, lake pollutants, because I'm still arguing that, to me, going direct drive 150 feet is certainly worse than allowing that water to go through a much longer clean out area naturally behind the road. And then there's long-term risks to the property owner having a culvert or some kind of water operation right on the yard.
Well, and I think we're probably getting, in the interest of time, I think we maybe need to circle back and then skip forward. But
Okay.
I think that, and I don't want to speak for the whole council, but the issue really at hand is we're not going to do anything without doing a study. I think that's fair to say. We're not going to plug a culvert. We're not going to move a culvert. We're not going to do anything on your property without some sort of study or evidence to back all of this up. I think the question then is that the direction we want to go, or do we feel like the city has no business doing anything on this property, A, and and/or moving a culvert. So I kind of feel like there's two issues. I don't know what direction the council feels like they want to go.
The culvert's been there for years and years. And now, the fact is that Steve wants to sell the property.
Well, it's
And
not
now
selling.
that's where the issue is.
It's not selling for the price
So-
that I'm being taxed at.
Well, but just to
I mean,
point
that-
out, the value of your property is based on sales of similar properties. So an assessor isn't going out and seeing water on your property and saying it's worth less. So that is somewhat of a misconception of the general public, but just to make that clear.
I don't feel we should do anything.
So no study, no.
Nothing.
Okay. Anybody else have anything to?
I mean, think if you were there, you lived there, and all of a sudden this thing shows up. You come out one day, nobody said anything. I mean, I know the system works because I was here for a city council meeting for another non-related
Yeah,
subject.
no
so I
one's
just-
arguing that.
I know, but I just
that
I just-
this is a great situation for you. I mean, no one is trying to say
it's
that.
literally ruined the situation, I think. I mean, I want it back the way, I want the old culvert back. If that's the way you're gonna maintain it, give me the plug sucker. I mean, that was great. That thing was plugged solid, and I had it for years like that. I love the old culvert. Who wouldn't want it like that?
Well, there might be somebody upstream that might think the exact opposite of you because
But
of how it's-
upstream or downstream, I mean, nobody said anything, and to me, a non-maintained culvert isn't a culvert anymore. You know, and
well, it's still.
I just feel like.
Well,
there's
the
a lot-
backyards of the homes in Willow Court were saturated, so I don't know if any of the plugging that was it caused by your hands caused
Willow
their
Park,
flooding,
where's the
but they
Willow
were
Park area?
they've
There's-
been pretty saturated in their backyards along that, going east to west.
I don't know where you're talking about. That's along the ditch there?
It's
Is the
parallel to
backyard part of
Imhoff,
the
right?
ditch?
Parallel to Imhoff, just on the north side of the road.
Follows the red arrow that you drew to
Yeah,
Dwayne's
you
property.
can go back to that page if you want, but, I mean, unless those people own right in the ditch there, I mean, that's kind of a public waterway that's there, right, the ditch?
Yeah, they got trees in their backyard, and their grass was pretty
I mean,
saturated.
Council, we have a
That's
big
besides the
agenda
point.
tonight. I
Yeah.
think we should make a motion or move forward in some manner.
Well, I mean,
You
there's
actually-
the motion to
yeah,
make.
I'm sorry, you don't
Or-
just
I mean, if
resolve
there
the
is a
issue.
motion to make, is what I meant to say.
Mhm.
What were you saying? Al?
I think I could throw a little something in here. I remember going down that, what is now Imhoff. And Jim is probably the only other person in the room that can remember that, where you stop the car, you could throw a stone into the lake because it was right along the edge. Remember that?
He doesn't know what you're talking about. No.
What was that? Before all those houses were thrown in there. That road pulled over and went right alongside the lake. Yep. Right? Yes. And so when the township moved that road out, and that was done because the value next to the lake would be a lot better for their taxes and so forth. You understand why we did it? They did it. That changed the flow of water at some point in time. And they considered where it was going down and they put a culvert there. When it got turned over to the city, it was through annexation. It was redone later with another culvert, same place, for the same reason. And something came along, like a piece of plywood, is that what we were talking about, for a plug or something like that? And changed that, but it didn't have the big change every single rainfall. But what would happen if the rainfall was like we had 2 years ago, or not 2 years ago, back in 2002 or something like that, before that was plugged, if it were plugged back then, there might have been a whole slew of people that were getting flooded basements and so forth. And if they found that we had plugged a culvert that would have got rid of that water that is in their basement, there'd be no end to lawsuits. And so we can't just keep it. The history goes way back, and there has been water going through that area, either it was on top of the surface way back when and then into a culvert directly into the lake, or into this culvert since the last change has been made. And it still has to be dealt with, and we have to kind of prepare ourselves for the absolute worst. I don't know what your memories are of '02 when we had flooding all over Wright County.
Yeah,
and
you had to turn the lake off, basically. You had
It's
sewer
right
damage
through the
went
lake,
into the
yes.
lake. I remember
You're
that.
right.
I remember teasing Terry Oshlin about that, flying over the lake saying, wow, it stinks, you know, and you couldn't even boat out on the lake.
Well,
So I know that
yeah.
Howard Lake has seen some real rough times.
yeah, and we don't want to
I mean,
get people anywhere up and down the way dealing with a whole basement full of water because we tried to click off.
I think you have that every time you don't maintain culverts today. I think you have that risk factor, you have that situation today. Well, whether this culvert has anything to do with it, if culverts aren't maintained and city runoff water streets aren't maintained, you have that potential threat today.
Yep, but we're not going to buy into
Yeah.
a more likely
All right, so Nick, last 2 weeks ago or whatever, you had offered me some compensation for this. Is that
So
still
what
on the
I said,
table?
Steve, is that with the plug culvert going east and west on Ingram, which you are absolutely correct, that may have resulted in more inflow to water to your property. And if you took 10 minutes and spoke to an attorney, you would realize that we are responsible for that damage and we need to fix that. We need to quantify, identify, and come to an agreement on that. I absolutely said that.
Okay.
Which is, again,
Because the
why-
letter I got in December was the threat letter from the attorney saying, we owe you nothing. That was right before Christmas. It was the direct opposite of what you said now 2 weeks ago. So I appreciate what you said, and we had a good meeting on it, but it was mixed signals in that regard to the letter I have from,
And
I
the
believe it's
mixed-
from you, Mike.
Yes, the mixed signals come from, I did not realize that we had put more water on your property potentially
Oh, yeah.
because of the plugged culvert, which was our doing, via the construction project.
Yeah.
So if that, just as exactly as Nick says, if our doing resulted in damage to your property by putting more water than we otherwise would, then that is something that we need to look at and see if we can't
Okay.
put back.
Okay.
Which was corrected after the contractor realized the error.
So
Yeah.
how long was it like that?
A couple weeks, probably.
No, it lasted all the way up to November. It took me from May to November to convince, not May. It initially was open, if you can hear some slides there, right up until, I think it was July. And then when the bike path got finished, then they covered it all up on Ingram. They blocked off Ingram completely. And I said, whoa, what's going on here? And it took from July to November to convince you guys that you had blocked it. And I had Dan to do, the area hydrologist out there. I had reached out to the DNR. I had several people walk it. I was going crazy. I couldn't believe it. I talked to Sheila Kronos, I think was the previous engineer, and she swore by it that they never blocked it, and that was never the intent. And I reviewed the building, the permits, or the blueprints. All in all, it was surprising to me how long it took the city to really react to this and actually recognize that it was actually clogged and plugged. And
So we'll have to deal with that at a different
I couldn't.
time,
So
obviously,
it was
right?
it was no quick 2 weeks by any means. It was it was surprising.
Well, we have to move on. So
Yeah.
if somebody's going to make a motion, now would be the time.
What are we making a motion on?
If you want to do anything regarding this issue. So I mean, kind of the things we talked about are order a hydrology study, or if you have some better option, move culvert, or we do nothing.
I make a motion to take no action.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Take my action.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from the council? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay. That's the final answer. I can call the buyer and tell them not having it. Not
Yeah,
getting
I mean,
that
you
buyer.
still can do whatever you want on your
No,
property.
I
to
know that. I'm
fix
just
it.
saying your decision,
Yeah.
just so you know, it carried that weight. Instantly overnight.
All right, item C, consider approving first reading of multifamily housing ordinance.
Yes, Mayor and Council. So this ordinance has brought forward some work that the police department has been working with multifamily property owners over the last couple years, dealing with some complaints that they've had with renters and looking at possible solutions. So the police department actually met with Buffalo PD because they have a multifamily housing ordinance, and met with them to discuss, what does this ordinance entail? What's your program like? How do you run it? Things like that. So basically what this ordinance would allow us to do is it would allow the police department to share information with multifamily property owners, their property managers, things like that, which currently we can't do. If the police respond to calls in a rental unit, legally they can't share that information with anyone else because it goes only to the people involved in that incident. So many times rental property owners feel like they don't know what's happening in their own buildings. They don't know if they have good renters, if they're renting to the right people. So in order to establish that ability to share that information, we would create this multifamily housing ordinance. Something that it does is it requires multifamily properties to register with the city. It also requires that all leases signed at those properties have an addendum that includes that all renters agree that they must be crime-free and drug-free while on the premises. And then in the event that there is any illegal conduct or as brought upon by a lease application, the police department would have a signed release from those potential renters to release any local contact that our police department has had with those renters. And then any ongoing conduct that happens at the property, if they're called for a potential drug use at the property, they could notify both the renter and the property manager that there was a violation of the lease at the property for this circumstance. So this allows everybody to be more informed. It makes sure that rental property owners can have more teeth to evict residents that are causing problems, or just have the information that some incidents are happening.
So does that become a condition of their lease then?
Yes,
Okay.
that we would require that they have crime-free, drug-free housing. Yep. So it's a condition of their lease.
And to be clear, this impacts multifamily properties only.
Right.
So
it's
apartment
like-
buildings.
Yes.
Right. Now it would have
Not
the
townhome.
no,
Gotcha.
but they would have the option to voluntarily sign up for the program if they wanted to, but it would not be required. It would only be required for multifamily properties.
So just to so they're going to share their renter information with the police department. The police
Correct.
department's going to share any call information with
Yep.
the property owner.
Correct.
Whereas now neither of those things is occurring. Okay.
Right, correct. So, again, like I mentioned, these kind of issues were actually kind of brought forward by property managers to the police department saying, hey, what can we do about this? And since drafting this ordinance, we have had a meeting. We sent letters to every multifamily property owner, inviting them, giving them an overview of the ordinance, telling them what it would entail, and then we actually met with 3 of them to talk about the ordinance. And I would say that engagement has all been very positive. They're excited for this to happen. Many of them have been waiting quite a while for us to be able to, do something more and be able to share this kind of information that we currently haven't been able to. So that's a little bit about that. Some of the, I can answer any specific questions you have about how the program might be run, but that's kind of the gist, just to be able to share information on calls. Only other thing I would note as, because a crime-free, drug-free lease addendum would be signed, the police department would be issuing letters to the renters and to the property owners that said there was a violation of your lease at this property due to this incident, and in some cases that we could require that they evict a resident. Now, a property owner could decide that they want to keep them, but they would assume then liability for any repeat nuisance calls, which kind of ties into the next agenda item. So there's a little bit of the enforcement on making sure that we have renters following these rules.
So why wouldn't the police department already be able to share that information with the property owner, since it's all a matter of public record anyway?
So they can't share any, just calls.
Oh, I see.
Do you understand?
So
Yeah.
if it's an actual
Incident charge citation.
Got
Right.
it. Okay.
Right.
So if they're called there for a suspicion of something,
Mm-hmm.
even though it shows up in a police report saying called to 97 Mallard Pass Trail for suspicion of whatever.
Eric.
Yeah. Unruly 8-year-old. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, makes sense. So would they all be required to, we would require them to do this, but we're kind of requiring them to do something they're asking for,
Right.
which seems so governmenty. But
Yep, so they would have to fill out an application, which would have the property owner's contact information. If they have property, like a property manager, it includes their contact information and information about their renters. So if there is an incident at the property, that the police have someone that they can contact about what's going on, and let them know if there, is a criminal violation or a nuisance issue or things like that.
and it's gonna be in their lease, but I mean, are we kind of expecting the property owner or manager to disclose this to their new renters, saying, just FYI, we have this?
Yep.
Yeah, you'd think.
Yep.
Well, in fact, in some instances, they kind of already tell their renters something similar to this, but they don't have the enforcement authority. So at this point,
Oh.
we'd be moving forward in tandem, the city and
Got
the
it.
property owner.
Okay. Makes sense. Questions, anybody? No?
No.
All right, well, I think, yeah, I think we'll entertain a motion. Excuse me.
I'll make the motion.
We have a motion, is there a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from the council? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item D, consider approving first reading of repeat nuisance call ordinance.
So this ordinance builds off of the multifamily housing ordinance. So this says that if there are more than 4 nuisance calls for service, for disorderly conduct, drugs, things like that are stipulated in the ordinance, or more times within a year, that we could start charging the property owner for repeated calls for service. Again, this has nothing to do with, if they call for EMS or, necessary
nuisance.
calls for service. It's nuisance calls for
So like
services.
loud music counts as a nuisance?
Exactly. So if the police department is called 6 times for the same renter blasting music through the middle of the night, like they could be charged for that monetarily. They could be charged for that. So that's kind of what this seeks to do. Again, this is
4
also
or more occasions.
right on
Yeah.
4 or more occasions within a year.
Okay.
And this is also as part of the idea of encouraging property owners when the terms of their crime-free, drug-free lease addendum are violated, and we say the police department can send a letter saying you are required to evict your tenant, but if you do not, you assume liability for these charges. So they would still be able to keep a tenant if they say, this was a one-time thing, or we don't think they would
It's a
ever do it
4-time
again.
thing.
Right. But then if repeated nuisance calls happen, then that property owner would be liable. So it again kind of puts some teeth behind evict people who are causing problems in your building.
How do we charge them for that? Or how, we send them a bill?
Yep.
And then have to follow up when they don't pay?
Mhm. Yep.
And then we're gonna add that to our
Fees.
accessible fees?
Right, so
I
when
would
the,
assume?
yeah, so that's another part that I would add, both the fee for registering, as a multifamily property under this program, as well as, any of the fees would be brought forward when the ordinance is approved to be
What was that
included.
fee for registering?
So we haven't set one yet.
So why do we have a
Looking,
fee?
well, so most of them have a fee just to process the application. It's like $20 a year.
Oh,
It's pretty
okay.
common. Yeah, it's pretty low, just like any of our standard renewal licenses.
Okay.
Are. And then at that same time, we would also bring forward a recommendation for what the fees would be for the nuisance
Okay.
calls.
I wasn't a big fan of this when I first read it, and I told Nick that today. I'm like,
Mhm.
I don't really feel good about charging someone for providing police service, because I feel like we should be private. But he talked me off the ledge, so.
Right. And again, the difference is that they're nuisance calls for services.
Right.
They're not any other type of call for service, like if you are concerned for your safety or anything like that.
Right.
Those are all absolutely valid calls for service, and you would never, ever be charged for those.
Like, I'm more inclined now to just extend this to all properties, because, like, there's a nuisance that's really bugging me, and if I can get 4 people to call, no, I'm just kidding. Okay. Makes sense, everybody? All right, if there's no other questions, we'll entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from the council? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item E, consider approving the 2018 crack seal and seal coat project. All the
Yes.
fun projects.
So in keeping with our capital improvement plan, we have programmed annually that we will seal coat to maintain the quality of, and they'll preserve the life of all of our streets. The next set of, we did seal coating last year. This year, the proposed sections to be seal coated include portions of 9th Avenue, 10th Avenue, 11th Avenue, 12th Avenue, and part of 8th Street, which are on the map in front of you. Again, this is similar to what we've done in previous years. They would seal all cracks that are in the pavement and then coat them in a seal coat material. So, like I said, this is a planned maintenance expense that we have included as part of our capital improvement plan. This year, we budgeted about $37,000 for this maintenance. But the recommended lowest bid for crack sealing and seal coating came from Bargain and is about $33,591. So it's under budget.
3,500 under.
Mhm.
Way to go.
Yep, so
And
it's
do we
under
have a
budget.
Schedule, timeline?
I don't have a timeline. The reason I want to approve it now is because they typically do this usually in the middle of summer when it's really hot.
Yeah, I would say we don't want to do it around good neighbor
Right.
days. We probably don't want to do it while people are driving through Woodstock.
Right.
Which that's
Mhm.
close through, but, okay.
Yeah, but we can schedule it to avoid those two dates specifically.
Okay.
Well, we know we got to do it, right, guys?
Yeah.
All right, we'll entertain a motion.
I'll make that motion to approve the quote for Bargain Inc. for crack seal.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from the council? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item F, consider approving plans and specs and order advertisement of bids for street repairs.
Yes,
Hot
so.
topic, hot topic.
It really is, Mr. Mayor. So,
It is everywhere.
so whereas Aurora went into a very prescribed plan that we're following for seal coating and chip sealing our existing streets, ultimately this is something that was, I wouldn't say unforeseen, but not budgeted. We know we have issues. And as we were discussing our capital improvement plan as recent as a few months ago, we knew that some portions of our city needed attention before the utilities underneath them. And that really comes down to a few neighborhoods such as Haywood and Dutch Lake, as well as an area near Munson Lakes and Joe's Hardware that receive a lot of wear and tear. Initially, when we discussed this, we looked at a larger mill and overlay project, and we quickly determined that we simply cannot afford it. So we tailored down the scope considerably to basically be a modest mill. We're not really touching the subgrade. We're still only going curb to curb, but ultimately, this is really a fancy patch. If you were to elect to do something more, the prices that we have in front of us would more than triple. I believe what we have in front of us addresses the worst of the worst citywide. When we went around kind of going to these issues, I really believe that we found the worst of the worst. And I actually want to take an aside with Councilor Dieter and Councilor Gilbert. This is actually kind of a positive thing too, where we had some well-intending residents come forward to us and say, hey, you need to look at this a different way. You know, we just heard from a different resident saying that we need to look at something a different way. We had this programmed out several years later than now, but we were finding a way to address the worst of the worst because a resident or residents came forward and we kind of came up with a stopgap solution. So ultimately what we have in front of us are 3 project areas. 9th Avenue, again, that's between Munson Lakes and Joe's Hardware. Dutch Lake, an intersection and about 150 feet in Haywood Drive and 8th Avenue, the intersection itself. The total estimated cost for these 3 areas is $82,906. That includes soft costs. Again, mind you, at this point, what we're asking for council approval is essentially to go out for bids for these 3 areas. We could entertain a different scope. We could do more, we could do less, but we feel we have a pretty solid handle on, like I said, the worst of the worst areas.
And how many years is this gonna buy us, Josh?
Mr. Mayor and Council, if I may a little bit, I mean, these are considered Band-Aids at this point. One note I'll make is on the Munson, as you see in the picture there, we will be doing some subsurface restoration as well.
Yeah,
Which
you
includes
kinda have to.
the subgrade. It's completely deteriorated in those areas. So these costs do include doing some additional gravel and subgrade corrections as well.
Okay.
As far as, I mean, yeah, you look at pictures of that of complete deterioration. You know, these patches, I would assume in 9th Avenue, I mean, they should progressively get 15, 20 years out of the patch areas.
Well, that was more than I was expecting.
The mill and overlays are more of a Band-Aid. It's really an appearance, and you're going to probably get a 5 to 10 year return on your money versus the full restoration, which we're doing actually
only 3 to 5 maybe.
Which matches with our CIP, mind you. So we're being deliberate with that. We are hopefully programming to do these roads as late as 2026. But again, as we've recently discussed with council, I think we could switch around some capital projects to likely do these as early as 2023. So that Band-Aid fix will likely get us to that long-term solution.
So it's not a very big section in Haywood that we're doing. I haven't been that way in a while, but I'm assuming this is the worst of it. But the rest of the street's not so great either.
I know. But that intersection is awful.
Yeah.
Absolutely awful.
It is.
I agree.
So, I don't want to jump ahead too much, but is this something we should look at doing again next year in some of these areas? I mean, do this, but are there other areas we would consider doing a more comprehensive patch to?
Yeah, so
to
I
buy
can
us
address
this
that.
time?
Every year, I think this is a really good learning curve where we'll be mindful and watchful of what we have for present conditions, kind of plan be damned. That being said, what you have in front of us, it's not cosmetic. I mean, they were dangerous areas that we need
Right.
to address. Haywood might not be aesthetically pleasing, but it's still functional, it's still safe. That intersection at Haywood and 8th needs
Yeah.
to be improved.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. I'll just share this quick. I was in Northrop this weekend for baseball, which is a cute, tiny little town just right outside of Fairmont. But I am not kidding you. They had frost boils that were 2 feet high. They had cones in the road. Like, you couldn't even drive down some of the streets. And some of the streets, it was almost like literally where the sidewalk ends. It just, like, it was just gone. So I was like, oh, ours aren't so bad. We're still going to fix them.
We were on the Mallard Pass little road, and there were a couple of little kids that were on rollerblades, and we were going, oh, are they going to disappear in that hole completely?
It's a sinkhole. They'll learn. Wear a helmet.
Ice cream.
So cost. Sorry, I got us off course here. Sorry, everybody.
Yep.
So the total estimate for the project for all 3 areas was
$83,000.
and so we're assuming we approve this. We're approving the project and then advertising for bids. So we would expect to do this work when?
So we would
hottest
consider
time of
approval of bids next meeting, and we would mobilize as soon after.
Okay.
That's pretty much the best I can tell you.
Okay, that's the best I expected.
Yeah.
If I
Yeah,
may,
go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, I mean, obviously, construction schedule is highly dependent on the availability of a contractor to just
Right.
come and do a few patch jobs. And as you know, those usually don't take precedence, so we're gonna have to be very, just forward and with the contractor.
Yeah.
We want these fixed as soon as possible. We gotta be a little forgiving too in the matter that it might not be the day after we award it,
Right.
that these corrections might take place.
Well, and I think as representatives, if we can tell people
If they know
definitively,
something's
we're going to
going to
fix
be
it
done.
sometime before it snows. It's just a matter of when we get on the schedule. That's,
That might rail them up.
I won't say snow. I'll say Christmas, I guess. So.
At least anecdotally, talking to a couple likely contractors, this type of work is a nice little fill-in where they might just have some extra time to literally fill in their schedule.
It could fall on.
And they have that capacity right now. I mean, that could change by the day, but that gave me a little bit more hope that we could see it done sooner than not.
And are we this engineer's estimate, it's actually a lot lower than I thought it was gonna be, so I'm a little nervous about that, but.
Yeah, so I'll address that a little bit, and Josh, you as well. We really reined in the scope. Originally, we were looking at a full rebuild of 9th Avenue because ultimately it needs utilities underneath that roadway.
Yeah.
That engineer's estimate was $200,000. We do not have $200,000 to spend on a block-long road.
Right, yeah. I mean,
So this is a different scope. It's literally smaller and the quality is less, but it's something that we can afford and it addresses our worst issues.
okay.
And what was Munson's take on this?
They're asking the city to front the entire expense. They've expressed verbiage that they have expensed a lot of capital over the last couple of years. They're also quick to remind that they fronted 100% of the unexpected utility costs from a few years ago that happened behind them.
Are you thinking why? Because it's a private, well, it's not a private road, but
Mm-hmm. Yep.
yeah, only used by.
Okay.
Well, anything else, council?
Nope.
All right, let's entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from the council? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item G, consider. Oh, sure. Sorry.
Kind of a curiosity question that, I have the picture of that one block that's like a smooth plowed field. Did that get hammered by frost boils and all that kind of stuff? Or would you say that just that unbelievable stretch of road that hammered with all kinds of heavy trucks that did that?
We've been patching that section year after year, good money after bad. This winter especially was incredibly aggressive with a big frost boil, and just to make minimum use of that road, we went out there with a payloader and just scraped it off. So it is done.
Yep.
Yeah.
Looks good.
Yeah, I drove on it.
Both.
Just think,
Yeah,
I mean,
really,
just like
both have.
sexually.
Yeah.
All right. Item G, consider approving construction management agreement for the Villas of Howard Lake development.
Yes, we are looking for approval ultimately for Bolton and Mink to manage the construction and, or I should say, the design, the bid, and construction of the road and utilities for the future villas project. The scope of this would include the design, the bid process, construction management, and closeout of that actual project. Working with Community Asset Foundation, the developers of this, we're proposing an aggressive schedule to the best of our ability. Mind you, I think Josh did a fabulous job of putting together an aggressive schedule that is still met with the realization that ultimately the first homes would hit soil September or so. Once we have the initial roadway in. So this is a relatively time-sensitive request. In terms of moving forward, again, what we're looking at is the approval of this construction management agreement in a not-to-exceed amount of $74,800. Mind you, in terms of the financial considerations, we're working out the TIF, the development agreement, and the purchase agreement. It's relatively understood that the city will be financing the roadway and paid back through the tax increment proceeds and any shortfall of the bond from the developer itself. This $74,800 would be rolled into that greater proceeds and not necessarily responsible to the general citizens of Howard Lake. Essentially, the 13 homes on Serenity Avenue would be paying for this road over the course of the bond. So tonight, what we're asking for again is the approval of the construction management agreement in a not to exceed amount of $74,800. Do you have any questions?
I know, council.
No, I don't either.
All right, if there's no questions, we'll entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from the council? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Item H, consider various approvals related to Good Neighbor Days.
It is already Good Neighbor Days. Can you believe that? We are about a month away from the big event. Tonight, we're looking for a standard set of approvals that council should be relatively familiar with from years prior. It comes down to 3 motions that we're looking for, and I'll kind of go through them relatively quickly. If you have comments, questions, please jump in. The first is to approve the events and their related locations. Council is asked to approve this primarily for insurance purposes. Through the League of Minnesota Cities Insurance Trust, we are able to provide them their liability insurance for their event. And by doing so, we need to show what events are occurring and where they're happening so that the binder can accurately reflect that. So the first motion that we'd be looking for is to approve the date, location, use of city property as described in the schedule of events.
Okay, someone like to make that motion? Or if you have questions, I guess, or?
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from the council? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, so the next item, this is the second year that we've been asked to provide beer and wine to the event. Last year, we partnered with Good Neighbor Days. They helped us with some staffing. We split some expenses, primarily through a 60-40 cost, or I should say revenue split. This year, we have seen slightly higher liquor liability insurance because we've upped the amount to a new state minimum. So that's a couple $100 more. We also expect some product to be a little bit more expensive. So ultimately, what we're looking to do is a similar arrangement, provide the liquor liability, sell the alcohol, and our proposed split is 75-25 City Good Neighbor Days. I'll fully disclose that that has not been fully discussed and agreed upon by the Good Neighbor Days committee, but frankly, the percentage is less important than us just simply making sure that we're covering our expenses and, you know, doing the right thing in that regard. So I think maybe that's 70-30, maybe that might change a little bit, but at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we reflect our increased expenses.
So having volunteers staff the booth isn't any sort of liability to us?
No, we take, each one of those volunteers actually goes through age certification,
Oh,
the same
okay.
training that our employees do. And we always make sure that if there's a couple volunteers, we match it with a couple city staff that are, you know, like used to liquor sales as well.
Oh, okay. Sounds about right. Okay. So I'm sorry, you wanted this as its own motion, correct? Okay. Would someone like to make that?
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from the council? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, the last one revolves around sponsorship of the actual event. I don't know for how long. I would suggest or suspect for quite a while the city has contributed $5,000 to the event. That covers primarily fireworks for Good Neighbor Days. They are asking for an additional $250 this year because their fireworks expense has increased. Very honestly, this is something that I would normally just say yes to and you wouldn't see in front of
Yeah.
you. But fair being fair, if I'm asking for a greater cost split and for your approval for the liquor sales, I'm putting this one in front as well.
All right, makes sense. But, I mean, $250, probably not much to discuss there, huh? Everyone likes the fireworks.
Oh, I love the
Yeah,
fireworks.
so, we'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Second. A motion and a second. Any further discussion from the council? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item I, consider approving a server upgrade for city offices.
Yes.
What did you break? Aurora?
Thank you. Thank you.
I don't know.
So once again, in the name of being planful, in our 2019 capital improvement budget for technology and the police department, we have allocated some funding to replace the Howard Lake Police Department server. Right now, it's behind lock and key in the chief's office, and it's literally a 12-year-old desktop computer. That was kind of a hack job a few years ago when we went through our CGIS certification to make sure that the server is separate from our main server, and we knew that we'd have to address it sooner than later. Fast forward to 2019. As we dug into this issue, it's really quite cost prohibitive to replace a police department server with a police department server. I'm not a tech guy, but what you have in front of you is ultimately replacing the city mainframe server as well as the police department server, and it's sectioned off digitally, and it will be sectioned off mechanically with a different cage and lock. So ultimately, for a cost of $8,000, we will have a new server for the police department as well as city offices. The other thing to keep in mind with this is as we look to transition our IT management to Palman computers, whether it's Palman or Marco, or as we've looked at multiple providers, our server as it stands now needs to be upgraded for remote access, remote management. Otherwise, we're going to be paying trip fees for every single issue, every single tech to come to Howard Lake to manage our server and our system.
Oh,
they're gonna do remotely,
Right.
Does that give you guys any sort of remote access then too?
Yeah, I mean, we already have a VPN, but through this configuration, we will likely never use it, but we will have access to the back end of it as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We don't want you going in there.
So
Is this-
again, in front of you, we have an estimate of $12,843. We've worked with Palman to bring that down considerably. It actually started closer to $20,000, but it had a whole lot of capacity and things that we didn't need. So we tailored that back to what you see in front of you of $12,843. But ultimately, what we're suggesting for approval is $8,661. And the cost difference behind that is not moving forward with a off-site backup in Buffalo. Right now, we have redundant backup in terms of two servers, and they provide backup to each other. But fundamentally, if we have a tornado comes through and wipes out City Hall, we're going to lose our server. We don't necessarily, I mean, in terms of cost benefit, that's kind of up to you, I guess, but we're suggesting not moving forward with that backup at this point. We provide redundant backup already. It's like we can do something different, I think,
Well,
to save
and I
that
mean,
cost.
if a tornado came through, it'd have to do a lot of, a hard drive's still a hard drive, so
Yeah.
like it's somewhat retrievable, I would think.
Right. It's certainly not foolproof. I'm fully
Right.
acknowledging that. It is like this much of a gamble in that regard, but we've also gone 20 years and only recently have we done redundant backups. So we're moving in the right direction in the terms of,
Yeah, no kidding.
yeah.
Totally.
When
Well,
are
if
you
you
looking
remember
to?
that
Spoke too
Bitcoin hack,
Yeah.
that's when we went to redundant backup.
Right.
So
Yeah, that Bitcoin hack was
When are you looking to do this? And is it a weekend type job for him, or?
they claim there's
18
minimal
hours, but-
interruptions because basically what they do is set up this whole new server. Our existing server stays in place, and because I don't know computer stuff, they just plug and play.
Okay.
So the actual transition is relatively seamless.
I've heard good things about Palman.
They've been really good to work with.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to be kind of that middle of the road where in the past when we were working with these larger firms, they were too big, too expensive. Dwayne Litchie through the school has provided a really good stopgap, but there's still kind of a bridge in the middle that we need, and I think Palman's going to handle it for us.
Where's he located?
Buffalo.
Where's he located in Buffalo?
Sure, he just actually opened up a new office on 25 North, close to the hospital, I believe.
Oh, and it's one of those professional buildings over
Mhm.
there, yeah. All right. 2019, gotta have server. All right, we'll entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion.
We have a motion, is there a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from the council? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item J, consider approving purchase agreement for 708th Avenue.
Yes, this is the vacant parcel kitty corner to where we're sitting presently. Subject to a house fire Christmas 2017, I believe. We had worked out the general terms of the purchase agreement. Unfortunately, Ms. Weege has passed away. but more recently, the estate has approached the city to move forward regardless, under the terms that we've already settled upon. So what we're looking at here, this is something that council has discussed in workshop at least a couple times. The city would look to purchase this with the intent of future residential development that would accompany downtown. I show some potential kind of mod sketches. The first is the villas. Presently, we have a memorandum of understanding with Community Asset Foundation, which actually includes this parcel, so this isn't something new or different than what we've already been discussing. One thing that I do want to be clear on, however, actually two things rather. First, that big, bold, highlighted section. I've had multiple property owners surrounding this area ask, are they coming for me, or are they going to be eminent domain, that sort of thing. I'm putting it on the public record now. I hope you guys say the same. No, zero intention of that. Frankly, this is an opportunity that came to us, not the other way around. Maybe in the future, if something else changes, that would be something that we consider. In fact, I even say that this is a design that could and should be built upon to be consistent across the whole block or even a neighborhood. But from a city policy standpoint, eminent domain, we're not going to do that. We're not proactively looking to buy other properties. And even some other subtle nuances with it is we're not going to limit people use of their property either surrounding this. People have rights to their property as afforded by building code and zoning. We're not going to like kibosh that regardless. So ultimately, I just want that to be very explicitly clear as part of the city's stance moving forward with this request. The second is a little bit more recent in terms of what I call a note of caution. This is only one single parcel, and we're hoping to put multiple living units on one parcel. It's tight.
Yeah.
So you may see the fact, if you're still interested, you buy this parcel and it still remains empty for years. That's something that you'd be aware of now and being upfront with it now. Even though we have a developer interested in this parcel, and I'm hopeful that we could see something happen soon, we may find once we start putting together a site plan, it's just too tight. At that point, you could sell it, or you could sit on it until situations change, or you could just walk from it right now. I mean, you're not obligated to buy this property. But again, in the name of transparency, I want that explicitly stated as well. So with that, I'll offer any questions or comments that you may have on this.
If the property is purchased, what do we anticipate for costs in cleaning the property up after purchased?
Great question. So currently there's a garage on site. The current owner has indicated that they would actually like to move that off site. That would be an option to them. Frankly, if we had to demo that garage, the cost would be relatively minimal. And we would likely stop there. In terms of grading or any other tree removal or preparation of the site, that's the developer's responsibility.
Well, but we want it to look decent.
Yeah, and in fact,
I mean, it's part of our downtown.
Yeah.
Weed agent over there.
Yep. So, believe it or not, city staff has actually been at least cutting the big kind of weeds and grass over the last 2 years, just with the handshake deal that we've had in place. If you desire, I mean, there's some pretty easy things that we can do just to make it look more pleasant in the meantime.
Yeah.
The last of the stumps, there's still some garbage,
I
things
think
like.
we should probably plan on
Right.
that.
Yes.
I mean, it's not going to cost that much. And,
No.
You know,
No.
And we can do it ourselves.
Yeah.
right. And keep it clean
Yep.
and mowed or whatever.
Yeah, we can get it down to, what I would like to do, assuming that we move forward with this, I'll have the conversation and at least at a high level understand the viability of the site in a short order. And if we could see development on that site, we probably don't want to spend a couple grand even on some of that other stuff.
Sure.
But that being said, especially if we're looking at holding that for a year, 2 years plus, grubbing the site, planting better grass, just cleaning that up is something that we'd move forward with at that time.
Good.
Well, what do you think? Are you going to be in the property business again, gang? Or still continuation?
It's a fair statement, though, that we were approached in a way that that the party, Ms. Weege, felt more comfortable in selling us or the city.
Yeah,
Yes or no?
twice over, I would argue.
Okay. I just want to make sure that everybody understood that too.
Yeah,
that we
no,
didn't-
thank you.
Good point, Jason.
First off, Ms. Weege approached the city and it was amicable, and I made it very well known, like, we don't want to take your property. Like, I could tell you a lot of personal horror stories of like going about this the wrong way, where we don't want to be the force job with this. We don't need that property bad enough. I think this property has strategic value to the city in terms of providing a housing type that we don't have close to our downtown. But at the end of the day, if something else happens, it's not something that we want to make enemies over or find ourselves in litigation, right?
Right.
So that happened with Miss Weege. With her unfortunate passing, it was my every intent just to stay away from it, honestly. Once again, they came back to us.
Well, I guess we'll entertain a motion then.
I'll make a motion.
We have a motion, is there a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from the council? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item K, old business. I'm hoping there is none. None, all right, sweet. Administrator's report, just upcoming council meetings. There's nothing for you to report specifically on. Motion to adjourn.
I'll make the motion.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
And a second. Any further discussion from the council? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned.
I do need you for about 10 minutes of workshop.
It